Story 1. The 911 call came in at exactly 2:17 a.m. The dispatcher would later describe the voice as wrong. Not panicked, not frightened, not even urgent. Just calm. Too calm for someone calling about what they claimed to be a murder. "I think someone inside my house has been dead for a very long time," the caller said. There was a pause, followed by a faint creaking sound in the background. The dispatcher asked for an address. Blackthorn Road, number 44. Another pause. "I just moved in today." Detective Elena Cross hated working night calls. Not because of the darkness or the silence, but because night crimes had a way of sinking into your skin. They followed you home. They sat with you at the dinner table. They whispered while you tried to sleep. When dispatch relayed the call, Elena was halfway through a stale coffee in her patrol car. The rain outside drizzled steadily, turning the city lights into blurred halos across her windshield. "Possible homicide," the radio crackled. "New homeowner reports deceased individual inside residence. No signs of forced entry. Caller remains on site." Elena sighed, finishing her coffee in one bitter swallow. Beside her, her partner Detective Ron Mercer adjusted his coat. "Dead body waiting for the new owners," Ron muttered. "That's a hell of a housewarming gift." Blackthorn Road sat on the outskirts of the city, the kind of neighborhood real estate agents described as historic charm, and buyers later called regret. Tall Victorian homes lined the narrow street, their wooden frames leaning slightly with age. Most were dark, curtains drawn tightly like closed eyelids. Only one house glowed faintly under the flickering street lamp. Number 44. Even before stepping out of the car, Elena felt it. A strange stillness around the property, as if sound itself avoided the place. Rain tapped softly against the cracked pavement, but the house seemed untouched by it. The front porch light blinked sporadically, casting broken shadows across the peeling wooden steps. Ron whistled under his breath. "Place looks like it eats people." "Let's just knock," Elena said. The door opened before they reached it. Standing in the doorway was a young man, mid-30s, pale and thin, with dark circles carved deep beneath his eyes. He wore sweatpants and a wrinkled button-up shirt, like he'd forgotten how to dress halfway through getting ready. "I'm Daniel Hargrove," he said quietly. "I called." Elena flashed her badge. "You said there's a body inside?" Daniel nodded. "Upstairs." "Who found it?" "I did." "And you live here alone?" "For now." Something about his tone made Elena pause. Not suspicious, just detached. Like he was describing a broken appliance instead of a corpse. Inside, the house smelled like dust and something older, something sour beneath the layers of neglect. Boxes filled the hallway, most unopened. The wooden floor creaked beneath every step, echoing through the hollow rooms like distant footsteps following behind them. Daniel led them up a narrow staircase. The banister felt sticky beneath Elena's glove, as if years of grime had fused into the wood. "Which room?" Ron asked. Daniel stopped at the top of the stairs and pointed toward the far end of the hallway. "The last one." The door stood slightly ajar. A thin strip of darkness leaked into the hallway like spilled ink. The air around it felt colder than the rest of the house, carrying a faint metallic smell Elena recognized immediately. Blood. She pushed the door open slowly. The bedroom inside was nearly empty, except for a single wooden chair positioned in the center of the room. And sitting in that chair was a skeleton. The remains were fully clothed. A faded blue dress clung to the brittle bones, its fabric stiff with age. The skull tilted slightly downward, as if the person had been staring at their own lap in their final moments. A thick rope hung from the ceiling above the chair, frayed and broken halfway through. Ron exhaled slowly. "Jesus." Elena stepped closer, scanning the room carefully. Dust coated every surface, undisturbed. Cobwebs stretched across the corners. The windows were nailed shut from the inside. "This wasn't recent," she said. "No," Ron agreed. "Not even close." Daniel remained standing in the doorway, arms hanging loosely at his sides. "I found her when I tried to set up my office," he said softly. "You didn't notice the smell before?" Elena asked. "There wasn't one. Not until I opened the door." Crime scene technicians arrived within 20 minutes, filling the house with flashing lights and murmured conversations. The rain outside intensified, drumming against the roof like impatient fingers. Elena walked through the rest of the house with a flashlight while the team worked upstairs. Every room felt paused. The kitchen still contained dishes stacked neatly inside cabinets. The refrigerator was empty but clean, as if someone had wiped it down before leaving. The living room held a dusty couch and a coffee table with a single object resting at its center. A small leather-bound journal. Elena slipped on fresh gloves before opening it. The first page contained only one sentence. The house chooses who stays. Detective, one of the technicians called from upstairs. Elena climbed back up, finding Ron standing near the bedroom doorway, his expression unusually tense. "What is it?" she asked. He nodded toward the far wall. The technicians had moved the chair slightly, revealing something hidden behind it. Scratches carved deep into the wooden paneling. Dozens of them. Long, frantic gouges etched by something sharp or desperate. They formed words, over and over again. "Don't let him hear you." Elena's stomach tightened. "Any ID yet?" she asked. "Working on dental records," the tech replied. "But judging by decomposition, she's been here at least 10 years. Maybe longer." 10 years, Ron repeated. "How does someone sit dead in a house for 10 years without anyone noticing?" Daniel answered from behind them. The house was vacant. They turned toward him. "According to the seller," Daniel continued, "no one lived here since 2009. Elena studied him carefully. "Why buy it then?" He hesitated, glancing down the hallway. It was cheap. By sunrise, the skeleton had been carefully removed, sealed inside an evidence bag, and transported to the morgue. Officers remained on site to secure the property. Daniel sat at the kitchen table while Elena questioned him further. "You said you moved in today," she said. "Yes." "Did the previous owner mention anything unusual about the house?" Daniel shook his head. "Just said it had history." "Define history." He wouldn't. Ron entered the kitchen holding a stack of old property records he'd retrieved from the city database. "You're going to want to see this," he said. Elena scanned the documents quickly. Ownership transfers, foreclosure notices, estate sales. But one detail made her pause. "Ron, these ownership changes, they happen every few years." "Yeah," he said quietly. "And get this." He flipped to another page. "Every owner disappears within 18 months of buying the place." Elena looked up slowly. "Disappears how?" "Missing persons. All unsolved." She felt the weight of the house pressing in around them. "How many owners?" she asked. Ron swallowed. 6. Daniel stood abruptly, knocking his chair backward. "I didn't know that," he said quickly. "Sit down," Elena said firmly. "I swear I didn't know." "Sit. Down." He obeyed, his breathing uneven now for the first time since they'd arrived. "Mr. Hargrove," Elena said carefully, "why did you really buy this house?" Daniel stared at the table for several seconds. Then he whispered something so quietly Elena almost didn't hear it. "It belonged to my mother." Silence swallowed the kitchen. Ron leaned forward. "Your mother owned this place?" Daniel nodded slowly. "She disappeared here when I was 8. Elena felt her pulse quicken. "And you just decided to move back in?" she asked. "I didn't decide," Daniel said. He reached into his pocket and pulled out an envelope, sliding it across the table toward her. Elena opened it carefully. Inside was a handwritten letter dated 2 weeks earlier. The ink looked faded but unmistakably deliberate. It contained only one line. "Come home. She's still here." The kitchen clock ticked loudly against the wall, each second stretching longer than the last. "Who sent this?" Elena asked. "There was no return address," Daniel said. "It was just in my mailbox." Ron exchanged a glance with Elena. "Why didn't you go to the police when you got this?" he asked. Daniel's voice cracked slightly. "Because I thought maybe someone finally found her." A loud bang echoed from upstairs. All 3 of them froze. Another bang followed, sharp, hollow, like wood slamming against wood. Ron stood immediately, hand resting near his holster. "Techs are gone. Who's still up there?" No one answered. The banging came again. This time, from inside the bedroom where they'd found the skeleton. Elena moved toward the staircase slowly, Ron right behind her. Daniel hesitated, but followed at a distance. The hallway upstairs felt darker now, though the morning sun had begun creeping through the windows. The bedroom door stood closed. It hadn't been closed before. Another bang struck from the other side, louder this time, vibrating through the wood. Ron reached for the handle. "Elena, you hearing that?" She nodded. "On 3, he whispered. He turned the knob and shoved the door open. The room was empty. The chair remained in the center. The rope still hung from the ceiling. The scratched warnings still covered the wall. But the evidence markers and equipment left behind by the technicians were scattered across the floor as if thrown violently aside, and carved freshly into the wooden chair, deep enough to expose raw, splintered wood, were 3 new words. Words that hadn't been there 10 minutes earlier. "Welcome back, Daniel." Daniel collapsed to his knees behind them, and from somewhere deep inside the walls of the house, a slow, deliberate knocking began to echo. Once, twice, then it stopped. The knocking never came again. Not while the detectives stood inside the bedroom. Not while Daniel sobbed quietly in the hallway. Not even while uniformed officers researched every inch of the upstairs floor, checking crawl spaces, air vents, and attic access points. By 8:30 a.m., the house had fallen silent once more. But silence inside number 44, Blackthorn Road, no longer felt empty. It felt like something was listening. Detective Elena Cross stared at the chair in the center of the room, while forensic techs photographed the fresh carving. The words were jagged and uneven, as if something had hacked them into the wood with desperate force. "Welcome back, Daniel." She crouched closer, examining the splintering around the grooves. "These cuts are fresh," one of the technicians confirmed. "No dust inside them. Whoever carved this did it recently." Ron Mercer leaned against the doorway, arms crossed tightly. "We've got officers outside. Nobody's gone in or out since the team left." "Hidden entry points?" Elena asked. "Check them." "Nothing." Elena stood slowly, her eyes drifting toward the ceiling. The broken rope swayed slightly, though no air moved inside the sealed room. "Bag the chair," she said quietly. "It's evidence now." Daniel sat downstairs wrapped in a gray blanket, staring blankly at the kitchen floor. His breathing had steadied, but his hands still trembled slightly. Elena sat across from him, placing the envelope containing the mysterious letter onto the table. "Tell me about your mother," she said gently. Daniel swallowed hard. "Her name was Margaret Hargrove," he said. "She bought this house in 2007. We lived here for about 2 years before she disappeared." "How did she disappear?" Daniel hesitated. "She just wasn't here one morning." "No signs of struggle?" "No." "No goodbye note?" "No." "Police investigation?" Daniel nodded slowly. "They searched everywhere. Said she probably ran off. Left me with my aunt." Ron entered the kitchen holding a small cardboard box recovered from Daniel's moving belongings. "You mind if we go through some of your personal items?" Ron asked. Daniel shook his head weakly. "Go ahead." Inside the box were old photo albums, school papers, and a stack of yellowed documents tied together with a faded ribbon. Elena carefully untied the bundle. They were letters, all addressed to Margaret Hargrove. None opened. Every envelope bore the same postmark, Blackthorn Postal Station. The dates spanned nearly 2 years after Margaret disappeared. Ron raised an eyebrow. She was getting mail after she vanished? Elena opened one envelope carefully using tweezers. Inside was a single sheet of paper. "He knows you're trying to leave." A cold chill crept across Elena's spine. She opened another. "You promised you wouldn't tell." Another. "The house doesn't like secrets." Daniel stared at the table, tears slipping silently down his face. "She never told me anything was wrong," he whispered. "She always said the house was lucky. Said it chose us." Ron flipped through his tablet, cross-referencing property records again. "Margaret Hargrove wasn't the first disappearance here," he said. Elena looked up. "You found something else?" Ron nodded grimly. "I pulled older missing persons reports tied to previous owners. There's a pattern. All of them lived alone, or with only one family member." "How many victims total?" Elena asked. Ron hesitated. 8 confirmed missing, including Margaret. Daniel's breathing hitched. "And the skeleton upstairs?" he asked quietly. "Forensics will confirm identity," Elena said carefully. "But it's possible she was one of them." Daniel shook his head immediately. "No, my mother wouldn't." His voice broke. "She wouldn't leave me like that." Later that afternoon, Elena and Ron visited the City Archives building, a crumbling structure that smelled like mildew and aging paper. The clerk on duty barely glanced up as they requested historical property records for Blackthorn Road. The files arrived in thick binders covered in dust. Elena flipped through them methodically, tracking ownership back through decades. "Look at this," she said suddenly. Ron leaned closer. The house had been built in 1931 by a man named Edwin Grange, the original owner. The name rang faintly in Elena's mind, though she couldn't place why. "Grange lived here for 32 years, Ron said, reading aloud. "Reported deceased in 1963. Cause of death? Natural causes. Heart failure." Elena frowned. Natural causes, but his property was abandoned for 5 years afterward before being sold again. Ron shrugged. "Maybe no next of kin." "Maybe," Elena said slowly. But something felt wrong. They requested Edwin Grange's personal records. The clerk returned 20 minutes later with a single thin folder. "Not much here," she said. "Most files from that era were lost in a basement flood back in the 80s. Elena opened the folder carefully. Inside were only 3 documents: a death certificate, a property deed, and a psychiatric evaluation dated 1959. Ron whistled softly as Elena read the report. Patient displays severe paranoia. Claims the house communicates with him. Reports hearing voices through walls and floors. Patient insists house demands offerings to remain satisfied. Elena flipped to the final page. The psychiatrist's closing notes read, "Patient poses potential danger to others if delusions escalate." "Offerings?" Ron repeated quietly. Elena nodded. 8 missing owners, she said slowly. Plus 1 skeleton sitting tied to a chair upstairs. Ron's face darkened. "You think this Grange guy killed them?" "Maybe," Elena said. "Or maybe someone continued his work." That evening, forensic results arrived. The skeleton's dental records confirmed identity. Lillian Porter, house owner from 1998, reported missing in 2000, declared legally dead in 2007. Daniel sat silently while Elena explained the results. "So, my mother wasn't the skeleton?" he asked quietly. "No," Elena said, "but she could still be inside this house." Elena didn't answer. Night fell quickly over Blackthorn Road. Police lights illuminated the property in pulses of red and blue, while officers maintained surveillance outside. Elena stood on the front lawn, staring at the dark windows above. Ron joined her, holding 2 cups of gas station coffee. "You look like you're planning to burn the place down," he said. "Tempting," she admitted. He handed her the coffee. "So what's the next step?" Elena glanced toward the attic window. "We searched the house properly. Every inch." By 10:15 p.m., the search began. Thermal scanners, fiber optic cameras, ground-penetrating radar units. Room by room, officers dismantled sections of wall paneling and floorboards. Most yielded nothing except insulation and decayed wooden beams. Until they reached the basement. The basement door was hidden behind a false wall inside the pantry. The hinges groaned loudly as officers forced it open, releasing a wave of stale, damp air. Elena descended first, flashlight cutting through the darkness. The basement stretched wider than expected, nearly the entire footprint of the house. Old shelves lined the walls, filled with rusted tools and glass jars containing unidentifiable contents floating in murky liquid. Ron scanned the far corner with his light. "Door," he said. A small wooden hatch sat embedded in the floor, secured by 3 iron bolts. Elena knelt beside it. The metal felt cold even through her gloves. "Get a crowbar," she said. It took 5 minutes to pry the hatch open. The smell hit them first. Rotting wood, mold, and something faintly sweet, like decaying fabric. A narrow ladder descended into a hidden crawlspace beneath the basement floor. Ron exhaled sharply. "You're kidding me." Elena didn't respond. She climbed down. The crawlspace forced her to crouch as she moved forward, flashlight sweeping across packed dirt walls reinforced with wooden beams. Then she saw them. Carved into the dirt itself, hundreds of names. Some were faint and crumbling with age. Others looked freshly etched. Ron's voice shook slightly behind her. "How many?" Elena stepped closer, reading aloud quietly. "Margaret Hargrove, Lillian Porter, Thomas Keegan, Rachel Dunn." Her voice stopped. One name stood out near the center of the wall, written in fresh, deep scratches. "Daniel Hargrove." They froze. From above them, The floorboards creaked slowly. Then came a faint dragging sound moving across the basement ceiling. Elena whispered, "Ron, is anyone else in the house?" He checked his radio. All units accounted for outside. The dragging sound continued. Slow, heavy, intentional. Then another sound joined it. A whisper. Faint, but unmistakably close. "Stay." Elena's blood ran cold. The whisper came again. This time multiple voices overlapping. "Stay, stay, stay." Ron grabbed her arm. "We need to get Daniel out of here. Now." They climbed out of the crawl space quickly, slamming the hatch shut behind them. As they reached the basement stairs, a loud thud struck the hatch from below. Once, twice, then silence again. They rushed upstairs to the living room, where Daniel sat surrounded by two uniformed officers. "Elena," he asked nervously, "what's wrong?" She grabbed his arm firmly. "You're not staying here tonight." "Why?" She hesitated, then said the truth. "Because someone carved your name into a wall under this house." Daniel's face drained of color. "I never went down there," he whispered. "I know," Elena said. He shook his head frantically. "Then how is my name there?" Elena didn't answer, because she already feared she knew. Outside, as officers escorted Daniel to a patrol car, Elena glanced back toward the house. The attic window glowed faintly, though no lights were on inside. And for just a moment, she thought she saw a silhouette standing behind the glass, watching them leave. Daniel Hargrove refused to sleep. Not in the police safe house they placed him in that night. Not on the couch. Not in the bedroom they insisted was secure. He sat upright in a stiff-backed chair facing the front door, eyes wide, hands clenched together so tightly his knuckles turned pale. He kept hearing the whisper. "Stay." Every time he blinked, he saw the crawlspace wall in his mind, his name carved among the dead. Detective Elena Cross arrived at the safe house just after sunrise. The rain had stopped overnight, leaving the streets slick and reflective. A cold fog lingered across the city, clinging low to the ground like a blanket that refused to lift. She found Daniel exactly where officers had left him, staring straight ahead. "You haven't moved," she said quietly. Daniel's voice sounded hollow. "If I fall asleep, I think I'll wake up back inside that house." Elena pulled a chair across from him. "You're safe here." He shook his head slowly. "No, I'm just farther away from it." Meanwhile, Detective Ron Mercer sat inside the records department downtown, surrounded by aging folders and crime scene photographs dating back nearly a century. The fluorescent lights above him buzzed constantly, adding to the headache already pounding behind his eyes. He had spent the entire night digging into the history of Edwin Grange, and what he found made his stomach twist. Grange had been a respected architect in the 1930s, known for designing elegant Victorian-style homes across the city. Blackthorn House had been his personal masterpiece. But beginning in the late 1940s, complaints about him began surfacing. Neighbors reported strange construction noises coming from his home late at night. Delivery drivers claimed he ordered excessive building materials, lumber, nails, concrete, despite never filing renovation permits. Then came the disappearances. Ron studied a brittle newspaper clipping from 1954. Local schoolteacher missing, last seen entering architect's residence. The article described how the teacher, Marion Holt, had visited Grange's home to discuss tutoring services for his nephew. She was never seen again. Grange denied she had ever visited. Police searched the property, but found nothing. The case went cold within months. Ron flipped to another clipping. 3 housekeepers resigned from Blackthorn residence, claimed disturbing conditions. One statement from a former employee stood out. "He talks to the walls like they answer him." Ron exhaled slowly and grabbed his phone, calling Elena. "You're not going to like this," he said when she answered. By mid-morning, Elena arrived at the archives building, Daniel accompanying her despite protests from protective officers. He insisted on seeing everything himself. They sat across from Ron as he laid out photographs, reports, and newspaper clippings across a long wooden table. "This house wasn't just Grange's home," Ron said. "It was his obsession." Daniel stared at an old black and white photograph of the house during its construction. "That's it," he whispered. "That's exactly how it still looks." Elena pointed to the blueprint Ron had unfolded beside the photos. "Not exactly. The blueprint showed the original design of Blackthorn House. far more complex than its visible structure suggested. Hidden passageways snaked between walls. Narrow staircases connected floors in secret. Several rooms existed in the plans that no longer appeared on modern layouts. Ron tapped one section near the center of the blueprint. This area here doesn't exist in the house anymore. It was removed from renovation records sometime in the 1970s. Elena leaned closer. What was it? Ron swallowed. A sealed observation room, built directly between the bedroom where they found the skeleton and the hallway. Daniel's breathing quickened. Observation, he repeated. Like a hidden viewing chamber, Ron said. One-way wall panel. Whoever stood inside could watch the bedroom without being seen. Daniel pushed away from the table suddenly, pacing the room. No, no, no. Elena stood carefully. Daniel, breathe. Just breathe. He shook his head violently. When I was little, I used to tell my mom someone watched me while I slept. Silence fell over the archive room. You told the police that? Ron asked. They said it was childhood nightmares, Daniel whispered. Elena glanced back at the blueprint, tracing the outline of the hidden room with her finger. We need to confirm if it still exists. That afternoon, they returned to Blackthorn House. The property remained sealed under police supervision. Yellow tape fluttered weakly along the porch while uniformed officers stood guard outside. Daniel hesitated at the front gate. I can't go inside, he said quietly. Elena nodded. You don't have to. He shook his head slowly. Yes, I do. Inside, the air felt heavier than before. The house seemed colder, despite sunlight spilling through cracked windows. Elena led them upstairs toward the bedroom where Lillian Porter's remains had been found. The room remained stripped of evidence, though the carved warnings still scarred the wall. Ron unfolded the blueprint again, comparing measurements to the room's structure. The hidden chamber should be here, he said, pointing to the wall behind the scratched messages. Elena tapped along the paneling, listening for hollow spots. Nothing. She tapped again, slower, methodical. Still nothing. Daniel stood near the doorway, hugging himself tightly. Then suddenly, he spoke. There. Both detectives turned toward him. Daniel pointed to a section of wall near the corner, partially hidden behind old wallpaper peeling from moisture damage. I feel something there, he said, voice trembling. Ron raised an eyebrow, but moved closer anyway. He knocked along the indicated panel. A dull, hollow echo answered. Elena's pulse spiked. Get the pry bar. It took less than 2 minutes to rip the warped wooden panel free. Behind it, darkness, and a narrow doorway just wide enough for a single person to squeeze through. The smell inside was suffocating, trapped air mixed with rot and something metallic. Elena stepped in first, flashlight cutting through decades of dust. The chamber measured barely 5 feet wide and stretched the full length between the bedroom and hallway. Shelves lined the interior walls. Each shelf held objects. Personal objects. Watches. Jewelry. Eyeglasses. Children's toys. Photographs. Hundreds of them. Daniel collapsed against the doorway, choking back a sob. These were theirs, he asked. Elena nodded slowly, her throat tightening. Souvenirs, Ron said grimly. At the far end of the chamber stood a wooden stool positioned in front of a narrow viewing slit, the one-way panel that faced directly into the bedroom. Elena crouched beside it, shining her light across the floor. Something else caught her attention. Scratches. Not on the wall. On the inside of the viewing panel itself. Desperate claw marks, as if someone trapped inside the bedroom had tried clawing through the wall toward the hidden watcher. Ron turned toward another shelf near the back corner. You need to see this. Elena approached carefully. Resting on the shelf was an old Polaroid photograph. It showed a woman tied to the chair in the bedroom, alive, terrified, eyes swollen from crying. The timestamp at the bottom read October 12th, 2008. Daniel's knees buckled. That's my mother, he whispered. Elena felt the room spin. You're sure? Daniel nodded, tears falling freely now. She wore that dress the night before she disappeared. Ron swallowed hard. Then she didn't leave this house willingly. Suddenly, the floor beneath them creaked loudly. Elena froze. Then came another sound. Footsteps. Slow. Measured. Moving across the hallway outside the hidden chamber. Ron drew his weapon immediately. Police! Identify yourself. No response. The footsteps stopped directly outside the bedroom door. Then, the bedroom door slammed shut. Daniel screamed. Elena rushed out of the hidden chamber into the bedroom. The door rattled violently, as if someone held it closed from the outside. Ron grabbed the handle and yanked. It wouldn't budge. "Help me," he shouted. Together, they forced the door open with a shoulder slam. The hallway outside stood empty. But something else had changed. On the hallway wall, fresh writing had appeared in dark, smeared letters. Letters that looked carved, not painted. She never left. Daniel collapsed onto the hallway floor, shaking uncontrollably. Elena stared at the message, dread settling deep into her bones. Because she was beginning to understand something far worse than murder had happened here. The house wasn't just hiding bodies. It was preserving memories. Ron approached slowly, his voice barely above a whisper. "Elena, if Grange built secret rooms, and someone kept using them after he died." She finished the thought for him. "Then whoever's doing this knows the house better than we do." From somewhere deep below the floorboards, a faint knocking echoed again. Once, twice, then 3 slow taps. The knocking stopped after the 3rd tap, but the echo of it lingered in Detective Elena Cross's ears long after the house fell silent again. The hallway lights flickered weakly above them, casting long shadows across the scratched message on the wall. She never left. Daniel sat crumpled on the floor, trembling uncontrollably, his breath shallow and erratic. Ron Mercer crouched beside him, placing a steady hand on his shoulder. "Elena," Ron said quietly, eyes scanning the hallway. "We need to clear this place. Now." Elena nodded slowly, her instincts screaming that they were no longer searching an abandoned crime scene. They were inside something alive, something that didn't want them there. Within minutes, additional officers flooded the house. Every room was searched again, every closet, crawl space, and attic beam inspected under harsh flashlight beams. Nothing. No intruder. No hidden occupant. No signs of forced entry. Yet the message remained carved fresh into the hallway wall. And the bedroom door still bore splinter marks from being held shut moments earlier. Elena stepped outside onto the porch, inhaling deeply. The late afternoon sky had turned a dull gray again, heavy clouds rolling in like bruises across the horizon. Ron joined her, closing the front door behind him. "You thinking what I'm thinking?" he asked. "That someone is still using this house?" she replied. He nodded grimly. "Or living under it." Daniel was transported back to the safe house under armed escort. This time, 2 additional officers remained stationed inside with him around the clock. But Daniel's mind was unraveling. That night, he began remembering things he hadn't thought about in decades. He remembered waking up once when he was 7 years old, hearing soft footsteps moving through the hallway outside his bedroom. He had opened his door slightly and seen his mother standing at the end of the hall, staring directly at the wall like she was listening to someone speaking through it. He remembered asking her who she was talking to. She never answered. She just smiled and told him to go back to bed. He remembered another night when he woke up thirsty and went downstairs for water. As he passed the kitchen, he saw a man standing in the pantry doorway. Tall, thin, completely still. Daniel had blinked, and the man was gone. When he told his mother the next morning, she grabbed him so tightly he could barely breathe. Then she whispered one sentence into his ear. "Never talk about that again." Daniel told Elena everything during her late-night visit to the safe house. "I thought they were nightmares," he said, rubbing his shaking hands together. "But now, I think they were memories." Elena sat across from him, absorbing every word carefully. "Did you ever see this man clearly?" she asked. Daniel closed his eyes, forcing himself to remember. Not clearly, but he always wore something dark, like an old coat, and he never moved fast. He just appeared. Elena exchanged a glance with Ron. "Like someone who knew how to move through the house unseen," Ron muttered. Back at the station, forensic teams continued analyzing the hidden chamber and crawlspace discoveries. Late into the night, one of the structural engineers assigned to examine the property called Elena directly. "You need to hear this," he said. By morning, Elena and Ron stood beside the engineer inside the basement of Blackthorn House again. The hatch to the crawlspace remained sealed, guarded by officers posted at both staircases. The engineer spread updated ground-penetrating radar scans across a folding table. "There's another void beneath the crawlspace," he explained. Elena leaned closer. Another chamber? Not exactly, he said, tracing the scan with his finger. It's a tunnel, runs under the entire house, and extends beyond the property line. Ron stared at him. Beyond where? The engineer swallowed. Toward the abandoned lot behind the street. Elena felt her pulse spike. Access point. The engineer nodded toward the crawlspace hatch. It looks like the tunnel begins directly beneath it. By midday, a tactical search team prepared to enter the newly discovered underground passage. Officers wore protective masks and body cameras while carrying portable lighting units. Elena insisted on going in herself. Ron followed without hesitation. The crawlspace ladder groaned beneath their weight as they descended once again. The carved names along the dirt walls seemed darker now, heavier, like they absorbed light instead of reflecting it. Ron pried open a reinforced wooden trapdoor embedded deeper into the crawlspace floor, one previously hidden beneath packed soil and debris. The door creaked open slowly. A blast of stale, icy air rushed upward. Below it stretched a narrow tunnel reinforced with old timber beams and rusted support brackets. Elena descended first. The tunnel ceiling forced them to hunch as they moved forward, their flashlights illuminating compact dirt walls and rotting wooden supports. The air smelled suffocating, decades of trapped moisture and decay. Their boots crunched against scattered debris, broken glass, fragments of old fabric, and something that looked disturbingly like brittle bone shards half buried in the soil. Ron swallowed hard. This place was used. Elena didn't respond. She was focused on the tunnel walls, because carved into them, at irregular intervals, were the same frantic scratch marks they had seen upstairs. The tunnel stretched nearly 30 yards before splitting into two directions. Elena, Ron said quietly, pointing his light down the right passage. Footprints. Fresh ones. They followed carefully, weapons drawn. The footprints led deeper underground until the tunnel widened into a circular chamber supported by thick wooden pillars. The floor inside was covered in scattered objects, suitcases, shoes, clothing, children's backpacks, all layered in dust and rot. Elena's stomach twisted. This was a storage site, Ron whispered. For belongings, she said. No, he corrected quietly. For people. Her flashlight beam landed on something at the center of the chamber. A metal hospital-style bed frame. Straps still attached to its sides. Rust stains covered the mattress springs. Ron stepped closer, examining the floor beside it. Elena, there's more writing. She moved beside him. Carved into the dirt floor and uneven, frantic letters were dozens of overlapping sentences. He watches through the walls. The house breathes. He never leaves. Then Ron's light caught something else near the back wall. A narrow staircase built directly into the tunnel structure, leading upward. Elena, he whispered. If this goes up, she finished the thought. It could lead into another building. They climbed slowly. The staircase ended at another sealed hatch. Elena pressed her ear against it, listening carefully. Silence. Ron nodded and forced the hatch open. They emerged into darkness. But not inside the house. They were inside another structure entirely. Dust-covered shelves surrounded them. Broken furniture lay scattered across the floor. A faded sign hung crooked above the far doorway. Blackthorn Funeral Home. Ron stared around slowly. This place shut down 15 years ago, he said. Elena stepped forward, her boots crunching across dried leaves scattered across the floor. Grange was an architect, she murmured, but maybe he designed more than just his house. Behind them, the tunnel hatch creaked softly. They froze. Neither of them had touched it. The hatch shifted slightly, as if something beneath it had moved. Then it slammed shut from below. Ron spun around, rushing to pry it open again. It wouldn't budge. Elena, he said quietly, panic creeping into his voice. She turned toward the far hallway of the abandoned funeral home, because she heard something else. Footsteps. Slow. Dragging. Approaching from deeper inside the building. Her flashlight beam cut through the darkness, illuminating peeling wallpaper and collapsed ceiling tiles. The footsteps stopped just beyond the hallway corner. Elena, Ron whispered. We're not alone in here. The air inside the funeral home felt colder than the underground tunnel, colder than the house itself. And from somewhere beyond the hallway came a faint whisper. One they both heard clearly. Welcome back? The whisper lingered in the hallway long after it faded. "Welcome back." Detective Elena Cross stood frozen in the abandoned funeral home, her flashlight trembling slightly as its beam cut through decades of dust floating in the air. Beside her, Ron Mercer gripped his weapon tightly, eyes darting across every shadow. "Tell me you heard that," Ron whispered. "I heard it," Elena replied, "and that hatch just slammed shut behind us." "I noticed." The silence inside the funeral home felt heavier than the underground tunnel. The air smelled like old chemicals mixed with rotting wood, the faint scent of embalming fluid lingering in forgotten corners. Elena stepped forward cautiously. "Stay sharp," she said. Ron nodded, scanning behind them once more before following her deeper into the building. The hallway stretched into darkness, lined with cracked portrait frames displaying faded photographs of funeral services long past. Most of the faces inside the frames had blurred with moisture damage, their expressions dissolving into ghost-like smudges. Halfway down the corridor, Elena's flashlight revealed a plaque mounted crookedly on the wall. "Blackthorn Funeral Home, established 1942. Ron frowned. Grange built his house in 1931. Then 13 years later this place opens directly behind it. Elena nodded slowly. Connected by a hidden tunnel. Ron exhaled. That's not coincidence. They reached the main viewing room. Rows of wooden chairs faced an elevated platform where coffins would have been displayed during services. Dust coated every surface, thick enough to record every step they took. Elena's beam landed on the stage. The coffin sitting at the center had been left partially open. Ron swallowed. That seems staged. Elena approached carefully, her heart pounding against her ribs. She reached the coffin and slowly pushed the lid open. Inside, nothing. Just a faded silk lining and deep gouges carved into the interior wood. Scratches. Frantic ones. Ron stepped beside her, his voice low. "That's not from transporting a body." "No," Elena said quietly. "That's from someone trying to get out." They moved deeper into the funeral home, passing through double doors into the preparation area, where bodies would have been embalmed before burial. The room felt colder. Metal tables lined the walls, rust spreading across their surfaces. Glass cabinets stood open, their contents scattered across the floor. Empty chemical bottles, surgical tools, and decayed medical supplies. Ron pointed toward a far counter. "Elena, there's paperwork." She stepped closer, brushing dust off a stack of brittle documents. There were burial records, dozens of them. Each listed names, dates, and funeral service details. But something felt wrong. Elena flipped through several pages quickly. "These burial records, they're duplicates," she said. Ron leaned closer. "What do you mean?" "These names match missing persons from Blackthorn House, but they were never officially buried." She held up one document. "Margaret Hargrove, burial service conducted, November 3rd, 2008. Daniel's mother. Declared missing in 2008. Never found." Ron's jaw tightened. So someone staged funeral services for victims who were never dead or were killed later. Elena nodded. They created fake closures, made families believe their loved ones were laid to rest. Ron stared around the room slowly. That means someone was running this operation long after Grange died. Suddenly, Elena's flashlight beam caught movement across the room. She spun toward it instantly. Nothing. Just a curtain swaying slightly in the corner. Ron noticed too. "You see that?" She nodded. They approached together, weapons raised. Ron yanked the curtain aside. Behind it stood another door. Locked. Elena examined the rusted padlock. "It's newer than everything else here," she said. Ron forced it open with a pry tool from his belt. The door creaked open slowly, revealing a narrow hallway lined with small numbered rooms, each one barely large enough for a single coffin. Elena opened the first door. Empty. Second door. Empty. Third door. Her breath caught. Inside lay a hospital-style bed bolted to the floor, restraints hanging from both sides. And mounted directly above the bed, a small ventilation grate facing downward. Ron stared at it. Observation from above. Elena nodded grimly. Like the hidden room in the house. They opened more rooms. Each contained identical beds. Identical restraints. Identical vents. Some still had fragments of clothing caught in the straps, brittle and decayed with time. Ron whispered, How many people were held here? Elena counted the doors. 8 rooms, she said. Ron's stomach dropped. 8 missing owners. Suddenly, Elena's radio crackled. Detective Cross, we need you back at the safe house immediately. It was one of the officers guarding Daniel. What happened? She asked sharply. Daniel collapsed. He's saying things. He keeps describing places inside the funeral home, places we haven't even searched yet. Elena and Ron exchanged a glance. We're on our way, she said. When they arrived at the safe house, Daniel lay on the living room floor, breathing heavily, sweat soaking his shirt. 2 officers hovered nearby, unsure what to do. Elena knelt beside him. Daniel, talk to me. His eyes fluttered open. He's angry, Daniel whispered. Who is? Daniel's gaze drifted toward the ceiling. The man in the coat. He says you're walking through his rooms. Ron crouched beside Elena. Daniel, how do you know about those rooms? Daniel gasped, clutching his head. I can see them, the small ones, the beds, the vents. Elena's pulse spiked. Daniel, can you see anything else? His voice dropped to a terrified whisper. There's another room. Bigger. Below everything. Where he kept the ones who fought back. Silence swallowed the room. Elena, Ron murmured. Daniel suddenly grabbed her wrist, his nails digging into her glove. There's a door in the funeral basement, behind the cremation furnace. Elena's breath caught. We didn't check behind it yet, Ron said slowly. Daniel's eyes widened in panic. He's there. He's still there. They returned to the funeral home within the hour. This time, a full tactical team accompanied them. Officers spread throughout the building while Elena and Ron moved toward the basement level Daniel had described. The cremation room sat at the far end of the lower floor. The furnace stood massive and rusted, its heavy iron door hanging slightly ajar. Ash still coated the interior, blackened by years of use. Ron circled behind it, shining his flashlight across the brick wall. Elena, there's a seam here. She stepped beside him. A narrow outline traced the bricks, a hidden panel disguised to match the surrounding wall. Ron pried it open. Behind it, a descending staircase vanished into darkness. Elena hesitated only a moment before stepping down. The air below felt impossibly cold, colder than anywhere else they had been. At the bottom, the staircase opened into a massive underground chamber reinforced with steel beams and concrete walls. The floor was lined with rusted cages. Ron's breath hitched. This wasn't temporary containment, he whispered. This was permanent. Elena moved deeper into the chamber. Her flashlight beam swept across the cages, stopping when it struck the far wall. Because someone had written something there in enormous, jagged letters. Letters carved so deeply into the concrete, they looked almost burned into it. The house must be fed. Then behind them, the staircase door slammed shut violently. Darkness swallowed the entrance, and from somewhere inside the chamber came the unmistakable sound of breathing. Not one person. Many. The darkness swallowed the staircase entrance like it had never existed. Detective Elena Cross spun around, her flashlight slicing across the sealed door above them. Ron Mercer rushed toward it, grabbing the handle and pulling with brute force. It didn't move. Damn it! Ron barked, yanking again. Behind them, the breathing continued. Slow. Uneven. Multiple sources, layered together like a choir gasping through rotted lungs. Elena turned, her weapon raised, flashlight trembling slightly as she aimed it toward the rows of rusted cages stretching across the underground chamber. Police, she shouted. If anyone is down here, identify yourself. The breathing stopped. Silence fell so heavily it rang in her ears. Ron slowly released the door handle and turned back toward the chamber, his jaw tight. That wasn't wind, he whispered. No, Elena agreed quietly. They advanced deeper into the chamber, their footsteps echoing sharply across the concrete floor. The cages surrounding them stood empty, most doors hanging open, their hinges corroded with rust. Elena's light caught movement inside one cage. She froze. A pile of blankets lay crumpled in the corner, mold-eaten and brittle. Inside them, something shifted slightly as dust collapsed inward. Ron stepped closer, nudging the pile carefully with his boot. The fabric crumbled, revealing brittle bones beneath it. A human skeleton curled into a fetal position. Elena swallowed hard. How long? Ron whispered. Long enough for nobody to hear them, she replied. They continued forward, checking cage after cage. Some held skeletal remains. Others were empty, but showed signs of recent disturbance, dust smeared away, chains hanging freshly displaced. "Elena," Ron said quietly, crouching beside one cage near the center of the room. She approached. Carved into the steel bars were tally marks. Hundreds of them, each cluster grouped into sets of 5, scratched with increasing desperation. "Counting days," Ron muttered. Elena nodded grimly. "Or nights." At the far end of the chamber, her flashlight revealed a metal desk positioned beneath exposed wiring dangling from the ceiling. The desk held stacks of notebooks and loose paper, surprisingly intact despite the damp air. "Elena," Ron whispered, almost afraid to disturb the silence. This place wasn't abandoned. She stepped toward the desk slowly, her pulse hammering as she flipped open the first notebook. Inside were handwritten entries, dated far beyond Edwin Grange's death in 1963. The first entry she read was dated 1974. "The house demands patience. The offerings must understand their purpose before the silence takes them." Elena flipped further. The handwriting changed across different entries, different authors spanning decades. Ron leaned over her shoulder. "It's like someone kept passing this operation down," he said quietly. "Not someone," Elena corrected. "Multiple people." Then she found an entry dated October 15th, 2008. Daniel's mother had disappeared 3 days earlier. Elena's hands tightened slightly as she read aloud. "The boy must remain untouched. He belongs to the house. The mother grows weaker. She refuses to listen. She will be moved to the deeper rooms tonight." Ron exhaled sharply. "Jesus." Elena flipped to the next page. "The house accepts bloodlines. It remembers them." A low scraping sound echoed behind them. Both detectives spun instantly, flashlights snapping toward the cages. One of the cage doors swayed slightly, though neither of them had touched it. Ron raised his weapon. "Show yourself." The cage door creaked again, then stopped. Elena turned back toward the desk, flipping through more notebooks quickly. Most contained observations about victims, their behavior, their resistance, their psychological breakdowns. But the final notebook looked newer. Its pages were crisp. The last entry was dated just 2 weeks ago. Elena's stomach dropped as she read it silently. Ron noticed her expression darken. "What is it?" She turned the notebook toward him. "Daniel Hargrove has returned to the house. The house is pleased. Preparations must begin again." Ron's voice dropped to a whisper. "This isn't history anymore." "No," Elena said. "It's active." Suddenly, the breathing returned. Closer this time. Behind them. Elena spun around, flashlight cutting across the far corner of the chamber, where shadows pooled thickest between 2 support beams. Something moved there. Not fast. Not slow. Just enough to shift the darkness itself. Ron's finger tightened on his trigger. "Come out," he shouted. The shape stepped forward slightly into the dim light. For a split second, Elena thought she saw a tall figure wearing a long, tattered coat. Then the lights flickered, and the figure vanished. "What the hell was that?" Ron whispered. "I don't know," Elena said, though her pulse screamed a terrifying possibility. Her radio crackled violently. "Detective Cross, respond immediately." It was one of the officers at the safe house. "What is it?" she demanded. "It's Daniel, he's gone." Elena felt the air leave her lungs. "What do you mean gone?" "He was in the living room 1 minute. Then every security camera inside the house glitched. When they came back online, he was missing." Ron cursed under his breath. "Any sign of forced entry?" Elena asked. "No, but there's something else." "What?" The officer hesitated. "There's writing on the wall where he was sitting." Elena's chest tightened. "What does it say?" The officer's voice cracked slightly as he read it. "He belongs home." Elena lowered her radio slowly, dread crawling through her veins like ice. "He took Daniel," Ron said quietly. "Or Daniel went willingly," she replied. Behind them, a faint knocking echoed from somewhere deeper inside the chamber. 3 taps. Exactly like before. Elena turned toward the far wall, where the cages ended. Her flashlight revealed something she hadn't noticed earlier. A narrow corridor extending beyond the chamber, sloping downward even further beneath the earth. Ron stared at it, horror settling across his face. "How deep does this place go?" he whispered. Elena stepped toward the corridor slowly, deep enough to hide someone forever. As they approached, a faint sound drifted upward from the darkness below. Not breathing this time. Not knocking. A voice. Soft. Weak. Calling from somewhere far beneath them. Elena. Her blood froze. Because she had never told Daniel her first name. The call came in at 3:12 a.m. Detective Mara Ellison had been staring at the case board for nearly 6 straight hours inside the cold task force office. Empty coffee cups surrounded her like discarded evidence markers. Red string connected photos of victims, phone records, and the growing list of suspects that refused to make sense. And now a new piece had just dropped into her lap. Officer Ramirez stepped through the doorway holding a yellow incident slip and a tablet. "We just got a 911 call from a truck stop outside Millhaven County," he said, his voice low. "Caller claims he saw one of your victims alive." Mara's heart stuttered. "That's impossible," she replied instantly. "Yeah," Ramirez said, nodding. "That's what I thought too." But the caller described details that aren't public. Mara slowly stood up. "Which victim?" Ramirez turned the tablet toward her. "Lena Brooks." The name hit like a hammer. Lena Brooks had been the 4th disappearance in what the media had begun calling the Route 88 vanishing chain. Her remains had never been found, but her blood had been discovered in her abandoned vehicle 3 months earlier. She was officially presumed dead. "Where's the caller now?" Mara asked. "Still at the truck stop. Patrol's holding him." Mara grabbed her jacket without another word. The drive. The truck stop sat 70 miles north, isolated between long stretches of dark highway and farmland. As Mara drove through the early morning fog, she replayed the entire Lena Brooks timeline in her mind. 24 years old. Nursing student. Last seen leaving her late shift at St. Alden Medical Center. Her car had been found parked perfectly along the shoulder of Route 88. No signs of struggle. No fingerprints except Lena's. But the blood in the passenger seat told a different story. They had spent months searching woods, lakes, abandoned buildings, nothing. Until now. Mara gripped the steering wheel tighter. If someone saw Lena alive, it could rewrite everything. The truck stopped. The neon sign flickered above the gas station, like it was barely holding on to life. Patrol cruisers cast rotating blue lights across the empty parking lot. Inside, a nervous middle-aged man sat hunched over a coffee cup, his baseball cap twisted in his hands. Officer Daniels gestured Mara over. "This is Roger Hensley, long-haul trucker. He's the one who called it in." Mara pulled out a chair and sat across from him. "Mr. Hensley, I'm Detective Ellison. I understand you saw someone you believe is Lena Brooks." Roger swallowed hard. "I didn't believe it was her," he said quietly. "I know it was her." Mara slid Lena's photo across the table. Roger stared at it, then nodded immediately. "That's her. Same girl. When did you see her?" "About 2 hours ago. Out back near the loading docks." Mara leaned forward. "Tell me exactly what happened." Roger wiped sweat from his forehead. "I was checking my trailer lights when I saw someone standing near the dumpsters. Thought it was just a hitchhiker at first, but she looked wrong." "Wrong how?" "She was barefoot, and she was wearing hospital scrubs. Dirty ones." Mara felt her pulse spike. "Did she speak to you?" Roger nodded slowly. "She asked me if I had a phone." "Did you give her one?" "I tried, but when I turned back toward my truck to grab it, she was gone." "Gone how?" "She just vanished behind the loading building. I followed her. There's only one exit back there, and it leads to a locked maintenance gate." "Did you check it?" "Yes. Still locked. No way out." Mara exchanged a glance with Officer Daniels. "Did you notice anything else?" she asked. Roger hesitated. "Yeah," he whispered. She kept looking over her shoulder, like someone was chasing her. The security footage. The truck stop manager unlocked the surveillance office with shaking hands. The monitors hummed softly, displaying grainy black and white camera angles. "Camera 6 covers the loading dock," he said. Mara leaned forward as the footage rewound. 1:07 a.m. The screen showed empty pavement, flickering lights, drifting mist. Then, a figure stumbled into frame. Barefoot, wearing oversized scrubs. Mara felt her stomach drop. "Pause it," she said sharply. The image froze. Even through the distortion, the resemblance was unmistakable. Lena Brooks. Alive. But she looked skeletal, her hair tangled, her movements erratic, like she could barely stay upright. "Keep rolling," Mara said. The footage resumed. Lena staggered toward the dumpsters. She turned toward the camera, her face briefly illuminated by the security light. Her lips moved. Mara leaned closer. "Enhance the audio if possible," she ordered. The manager shook his head. "These cameras don't record sound." Lena suddenly turned her head towards something off-screen. Her entire body stiffened. And then she ran, straight toward the maintenance gate. The next camera angle picked her up approaching the locked fence. She grabbed the chain, tugged desperately. Then, the lights behind her flickered out for 3 seconds. When they came back on, Lena was gone. The impossible exit. Mara and Daniels walked behind the building to examine the area personally. The maintenance gate stood tall and rusted, chained tightly with a heavy industrial lock. Mara crouched beside the ground. Fresh footprints marked the wet gravel. Bare footprints. They led straight to the fence, then stopped. Daniels shined his flashlight across the surrounding area. "There's no other way out," he said. Mara studied the fence line carefully. No cut wires. No broken chain. No sign of climbing. "Someone took her," she whispered. Daniels turned toward her. "You think the killer came back for her?" Mara didn't answer immediately, because the thought growing in her mind was far worse. The pattern break. Back at the task force office, the entire team gathered around the board as Mara played the footage again. Detective Harris leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "This breaks the timeline," he said. "Every victim was presumed dead within 48 hours of disappearance." "Not anymore," Mara replied. Forensic analyst June Patel adjusted her glasses. "If Lena was alive for 3 months, that means the offender keeps them somewhere." "Somewhere controlled," Harris added. "Secure. Hidden." Mara nodded. "And close enough to Route 88 to transport them repeatedly." June typed rapidly on her laptop. "I'm rechecking all missing persons cases within a 200-mile radius. If this offender keeps victims alive." She stopped mid-sentence. "What is it?" Mara asked. June turned the screen toward her. "There's another woman." The room went silent. "Name?" Mara asked. "Clara Jennings. Reported missing 2 years ago. Same highway corridor. Her case was ruled voluntary disappearance." "Why?" "Because her phone pinged at multiple gas stations over 3 days, then shut off." Mara stared at the map June pulled up. The ping trail formed a looping path along Route 88, like someone was driving in circles. Transporting cargo. The hidden file. Mara returned to Lena Brooks' original case file and began rereading every witness statement from the beginning. Something had always bothered her about Lena's shift supervisor, a man named Dr. Elliot Crane. He had been the last confirmed person to see Lena alive. At the time, he claimed she left work early due to a migraine. Mara reopened his statement transcript. Her eyes scanned every line, every timestamp. Then she froze. "June," she called. "Pull up hospital security logs from Lena's last shift." June hesitated. "We already reviewed those months ago." "Pull them again." Minutes later, June's brow furrowed. "Detective, Dr. Crane badged out of the hospital parking garage 23 minutes after Lena's car left." Mara's chest tightened. "Show me traffic camera records along his route home." June typed rapidly, pulling up archived transportation footage. Several grainy still frames appeared. One of them showed Dr. Crane's SUV passing a toll camera. Time stamp, 11:42 p.m. Mara leaned closer. "Zoom into the back seat." June enhanced the image as much as possible. A shadow moved behind the tinted glass. Not a reflection. Movement. Human movement. The visit. 2 hours later, Mara and Harris stood outside Dr. Elliot Crane's suburban home. The house looked pristine. Perfect lawn. Porch lights glowing warmly. Too perfect. Mara knocked firmly. After several seconds, the door opened. Dr. Crane stood there in pajama pants and a pressed button-up shirt, as if he never allowed himself to appear unprofessional. "Detective Ellison," he said calmly. "It's late. Is something wrong?" Mara studied his expression carefully. "Dr. Crane, we need to ask you some follow-up questions about Lena Brooks." Crane's smile barely shifted. "I already told investigators everything I know." Harris stepped forward slightly. "Mind if we come in anyway?" Crane hesitated, then stepped aside. "Of course. The House of Order." Inside, the home smelled faintly of antiseptic and lavender. Everything was arranged with surgical precision. Family photos lined the hallway. Except, Mara noticed something odd. There were no photos featuring Crane with anyone else. No spouse, no children, no friends. Just landscapes and medical award certificates. Crane led them into the living room. "What exactly prompted this visit?" he asked. Mara held up her phone, displaying the surveillance still of his SUV. "We've been reviewing additional evidence." Crane glanced at the image briefly. "That's my vehicle," he said evenly. "Were you alone the night Lena Brooks disappeared?" "Yes." Mara leaned forward slightly. "Are you sure?" Crane's gaze met hers, steady and cold. "I am very sure." Harris shifted his stance. "Mind if we look around your garage?" Crane's expression didn't change. "Do you have a warrant?" Mara held his gaze for several seconds. "Not yet." Silence filled the room. Crane folded his hands calmly. "Then I'm afraid I'll have to decline." The phone call. As Mara and Harris walked back toward their car, Harris exhaled sharply. "He's hiding something." "I know," Mara replied. Before she could continue, her phone rang. It was June. "Mara, you need to hear this." "Go ahead." "We just got another 911 call." Mara stopped walking. "From where?" "Different county. 40 miles east of the truck stop." Mara's stomach twisted. "Who called?" "A teenage girl. She said she escaped from a building near an abandoned slaughterhouse." Mara's voice dropped. "Is she safe?" "Yes. Patrol picked her up 10 minutes ago." Mara's knuckles turned white around the phone. "What did she say?" June hesitated. "She said she wasn't alone in there." The world seemed to tilt. "How many?" Mara asked quietly. June swallowed. "She said there were cages." The realization. Mara slowly lowered the phone. Harris stared at her. "What is it?" Mara looked back at Dr. Crane's house. The porch light flickered slightly in the distance. "They're alive," she whispered. Harris's face went pale. "All of them?" Mara shook her head slowly. "I don't know," she said. "But I think we just found where they've been disappearing to." The final shot of the chapter. Inside Dr. Crane's house, unseen behind the curtains, Elliot Crane stood perfectly still, watching the detectives drive away. In his hand, he held a small remote device. He pressed a single button. Miles away, deep beneath an abandoned slaughterhouse, fluorescent lights flickered violently inside a hidden underground corridor. Metal doors began locking automatically, and somewhere in the darkness, a woman started screaming. The abandoned slaughterhouse loomed like a rusted corpse against the gray morning sky. Its shattered windows stared out across acres of overgrown farmland, and the skeletal remains of livestock pens still lined the perimeter like broken teeth. The building had been shut down nearly 15 years ago after multiple sanitation violations and financial collapse. Since then, it had rotted quietly. Until now. Police cruisers, ambulances, and unmarked task force vehicles surrounded the property as officers established a perimeter. Yellow crime scene tape fluttered in the winter wind, snapping against rusted fencing. Detective Mara Ellison stepped out of her SUV and stared at the structure. Something about the place made her chest tighten. It felt wrong. Detective Harris joined her, adjusting his jacket. "Rescue team just finished clearing the upper floors," he said. "Nothing but dust and old equipment." Mara nodded, but her eyes were fixed on the emergency van parked near the entrance. Inside sat the teenage girl who had made the 911 call. The one who escaped. The survivor. The girl's name was Emily Carter, 16 years old. Missing for 8 days. Mara stepped inside the ambulance where a paramedic wrapped a blanket around Emily's shoulders. The girl's face was pale, streaked with dirt and dried tears. Her wrists were bruised, raw from restraints. Emily flinched when Mara approached. "It's okay," Mara said gently, kneeling beside her. "You're safe now." Emily's breathing trembled. "You don't understand," she whispered. Mara kept her voice calm. "Help me understand, Emily. How did you get out?" Emily stared at the floor for several seconds before answering. "There was a power outage," she said. "The doors unlocked for a few seconds. I ran." Mara felt her pulse spike. "Did you see who was holding you?" Emily shook her head. "No, he never showed his face." "Did you ever hear him?" "Yes," Emily said softly. "What did he sound like?" Emily hesitated. Calm. Polite. Like a doctor. Mara's stomach tightened. Emily, were there other people down there? Emily's eyes filled with fresh tears. Yes. How many? I don't know. I could hear them crying through the walls. The descent. SWAT officers had already located a concealed elevator hidden beneath a reinforced steel hatch inside the slaughterhouse's main processing room. The hatch itself had been disguised beneath layers of rusted machinery and concrete panels. It would have been impossible to detect without Emily's directions. Mara stood beside the open shaft, staring into the darkness below. Harris clipped a flashlight to his vest. Rescue teams waiting for the go-ahead, he said. Mara nodded once. Let's bring them home. The elevator groaned as it descended, its chains rattling against the narrow shaft walls. The deeper they traveled, the colder the air became. Then, the elevator doors opened, and the smell hit them instantly. Antiseptic, bleach, and something else. Fear. The corridor. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting sterile white light across a long underground hallway. The walls were tiled in polished white ceramic, spotless and gleaming. Too clean, like a surgical wing built beneath a nightmare. SWAT officers moved forward cautiously, weapons raised. Mara followed behind them, her boots echoing against the tile floor. They passed several metal doors along the corridor. Each door had a small rectangular observation window and an electronic keypad lock. Door 1 secure, an officer called out. He entered the code Emily had provided. The lock clicked open. Inside, a woman curled in the corner of the small room jerked upright, shielding her face from the sudden light. Mara stepped forward slowly. It's okay, she said softly. Police. You're safe now. The woman stared at her, disbelief flooding her eyes. My name is Clara Jennings, she whispered. Mara's breath caught. The woman who had vanished 2 years ago. Alive. The cages. Door after door opened as rescue teams moved down the corridor. Each room held another victim. Some had been missing for months. Others for years. All of them were malnourished. Frightened. Barefoot. Dressed in identical hospital scrubs. Mara's chest felt like it might collapse inward with each new face. Then they reached the final door. Unlike the others, this one had 2 locks, and a reinforced steel frame. Harris glanced at Mara. You want to do the honors? She nodded. The code beeped. The locks disengaged. The door creaked open. Inside sat a woman on a thin mattress, her back pressed against the wall. Her tangled hair hung over her face, but when she looked up, Mara froze. Lena Brooks. Alive. Lena blinked slowly, as if struggling to focus. Is this another test? She whispered weakly. Mara dropped to her knees. No, she said, her voice breaking. You're going home. Lena stared at her for several seconds, then began sobbing uncontrollably. The control room. At the far end of the corridor, officers discovered another secured door labeled Operations. Inside, they found the control center. Computer monitors covered one entire wall, each displaying live camera feeds from inside the cells. Medical equipment sat neatly arranged across stainless steel counters. Files lined the shelves, organized alphabetically. Harris began flipping through one of the binders. Victim logs, he said quietly. Mara stepped beside him. Each entry listed. Name, age, blood type, psychological evaluation notes, treatment schedules, release probability. Mara's stomach twisted. Release probability? She repeated. Harris flipped to another page. Looks like he categorized them based on how compliant they were. Mara closed her eyes briefly. Then she saw something else on the desk. A digital tablet blinking with an incoming alert. She picked it up. The message read, Security breach, lockdown failed. Mara's pulse raced. He knows, she whispered. The missing one. Rescue teams began evacuating survivors to the surface as medical staff rushed to stabilize them. The underground corridor buzzed with controlled chaos. June Patel arrived shortly after, carrying forensic equipment. How many survivors? She asked. 7 confirmed, Mara replied. June scanned the control logs on the tablet. Detective, according to these files, there should be 8. Mara stiffened. Who's missing? June scrolled through the digital roster. Her face went pale. There's an entry labeled Subject 0. What does that mean? There's no name, June said. Just medical notes and surveillance tags. Whoever this is, they've been here the longest. Mara's pulse hammered. Check the cameras, she ordered. June pulled up archived footage from the hidden system. A grainy black and white feed appeared on screen, showing a separate chamber at the very end of the underground facility. A larger room, reinforced. Empty. June zoomed into the timestamp logs. Last movement detected, 20 minutes ago. Mara turned toward Harris. That's right around when Dr. Crane pressed that remote. Harris's face hardened. He moved them. The hidden tunnel. Forensic teams scanning the chamber discovered something terrifying. Behind a sliding panel in the wall, a narrow maintenance tunnel stretched deeper underground, sloping toward an unknown exit point. Boot prints marked the dust-covered floor. Fresh ones. He had a backup escape route, Harris said. Mara stared into the tunnel's darkness. And he just took his longest-held victim through it. The evidence. Back inside the control room, June opened a locked drawer beneath the main desk using a forensic pry tool. Inside lay a single leather-bound journal. Mara opened it carefully. Every page contained handwritten entries. Observations. Confessions. Rationalizations. The first entry was dated 6 years earlier. Mara flipped through dozens of pages until she reached the most recent one. Her voice trembled as she read aloud. Progress continues. Compliance improves through isolation and controlled exposure to fear. The mind adapts beautifully under pressure. She turned another page. Subject 0 remains unstable but valuable. Emotional resistance is strongest in her case. She reminds me too much of failure. Mara swallowed hard. What failure? Harris asked quietly. She flipped to the final entry. They're getting closer. Contingency protocol activated. If Subject 0 escapes again, I will correct my mistake permanently. The race begins. Mara slammed the journal shut. We need to find Dr. Crane now. Her phone rang before she could move. It was dispatch. Detective Ellison, we just received a BOLO alert from Highway Patrol. Mara's heart pounded. Go ahead. Dr. Elliot Crane's vehicle was spotted heading westbound on Route 88 15 minutes ago. Mara turned toward the slaughterhouse exit. Did they confirm a passenger? Negative, dispatch replied, but the vehicle's rear suspension appears heavily weighted. Mara's jaw tightened. He still has someone in that car. The chase. Task force vehicles roared out of the slaughterhouse property minutes later, sirens slicing through the cold air as they sped toward Route 88. Mara gripped the radio. All units, suspect is mobile. Potential hostage on board. Do not engage without confirmation. Harris glanced at her. You think he's heading somewhere specific? Mara stared at the highway stretching ahead. Yes, she said quietly. He's going back to where this all started. The final shot of the chapter. Miles ahead on Route 88, Dr. Elliot Crane drove calmly through the early afternoon traffic, classical music playing softly through his speakers. In the back seat, hidden beneath a heavy tarp, a pair of frightened eyes stared into the darkness. Crane adjusted his rearview mirror, watching the road behind him. Then he smiled faintly. Don't worry, he said softly. This will be over soon. The sirens screamed across Route 88 like war horns. Detective Mara Ellison gripped the steering wheel as her SUV tore down the highway, red and blue lights reflecting across the winter asphalt. Snow flurries had begun to fall, dusting the road with a thin, dangerous glaze. Beside her, Detective Harris monitored the radio chatter. Highway Patrol lost visual at mile marker 62, he said. Vehicle may have taken one of the forest access roads. Mara's jaw tightened. He's heading somewhere isolated, she said. He knows he can't outrun us on open highway. Dispatch crackled through the speaker. Detective Ellison, we've pulled satellite traffic footage from nearby intersections. Suspect vehicle was last recorded turning onto Old Quarry Road. Mara's pulse jumped. Old Quarry Road, an abandoned mining route that snaked through dense woodland and led toward miles of empty terrain. Perfect for disappearing. She slammed the accelerator. The suspect. Miles ahead, Dr. Elliot Crane drove with steady, unhurried control. Snow gathered along the edges of the windshield as classical violin music drifted through the car speakers. His fingers tapped gently against the steering wheel in time with the melody. Behind him, the tarp in the back seat shifted slightly. A faint, Muffled whimper escaped from beneath it. Crane glanced at the rearview mirror, his calm expression never wavering. "You're doing very well," he said politely. "Much better than last time." The figure beneath the tarp struggled weakly, ropes tightening around trembling wrists. Crane's eyes softened with something disturbingly close to affection. "You will understand soon," he murmured. "All progress requires discomfort." The victim. Beneath the tarp lay Subject Zero. Her real name was Rachel Dawson. She had been missing for 6 years. Rachel's breathing came in short, panicked bursts as she struggled against the restraints biting into her arms and ankles. A cloth gag muffled her attempts to scream. She couldn't see clearly, but she could hear the engine, feel the turns, sense the isolation surrounding them. She knew he was taking her somewhere new, or somewhere old, and she knew that once he reached it, she wouldn't survive again. The quarry. Old Quarry Road narrowed as it wound through towering pine trees. Snow thickened across the dirt path, and tire tracks carved sharply into the frozen ground. Mara's SUV skidded slightly as she followed the trail, her eyes locked onto the faint tracks leading deeper into the forest. "There," Harris said, pointing ahead. Through the snow-covered trees, a shape emerged. A weathered metal gate stood open at the entrance to the abandoned quarry property. Rusted warning signs hung crookedly from broken chains. Beyond the gate sat a single black sedan. Crane's car. Parked near the quarry edge. Mara slammed the brakes, and the SUV slid to a stop 20 yards away. Backup units screeched in behind them, forming a perimeter. "Weapons ready," Mara ordered. Snow crunched beneath their boots as they approached the vehicle cautiously. Harris reached the rear door first. He pulled it open. Empty. The tarp lay crumpled across the seat, ropes cut cleanly through. "He took her inside," Harris said grimly. Mara looked toward the quarry's central structure, an old concrete operations building perched at the cliffside entrance of a collapsed mine tunnel. One set of footprints led from the car toward it, 2 sets leaving. The tunnel. SWAT teams breached the operations building within minutes. The interior smelled of mold and damp stone, but something else lingered beneath it. Antiseptic. Crane had been here before. Mara led the team down a narrow stairwell, descending into the quarry's underground mine system. The air grew colder, sharper, carrying faint echoes through the cavernous tunnels. Then they heard it. A voice. Soft. Weak. Crying. Mara broke into a run. The chamber. They burst into a wide underground chamber carved directly into the stone walls of the quarry. Industrial floodlights illuminated the space with harsh white glare. At the center stood Rachel Dawson, shackled to a steel support beam, her wrists chained above her head. Crane stood several feet away, calmly preparing medical instruments laid across a portable surgical tray. He didn't turn when they entered. "I was wondering how long it would take," he said evenly. Mara raised her weapon. "Step away from her, Crane." He sighed quietly, as if disappointed by an interruption to delicate work. "You're ruining a critical stage of treatment," he replied. Harris stepped forward, weapon steady. "You're done, Doctor." Crane finally turned, adjusting his glasses calmly. His expression showed no panic, no fear, only mild irritation. "You misunderstand," Crane said softly. "I am helping them." Rachel sobbed behind him, her voice hoarse. Please don't let him touch me again." Mara's chest tightened. "Rachel, we're getting you out of here," she said. Crane tilted his head slightly. "You always promise them rescue," he said, glancing toward Mara. "But you never fix what's broken inside them." The monologue. Crane slowly removed his gloves, placing them carefully on the tray. "You see victims," he continued calmly. "I see subjects fighting against their own limitations. Fear is not cruelty. Fear is evolution." "You tortured them," Mara snapped. "I refined them," he corrected. "You abducted innocent people. I selected individuals capable of surviving psychological rebirth." Rachel screamed behind him, tugging violently at her chains. "You killed people," Harris shouted. Crane paused. "Loss is part of experimentation," he said quietly. The reveal. Mara stepped forward, her voice steady but burning with rage. 6 years, Crane. You kept her alive for 6 years. Why? Crane looked toward Rachel. His expression changed slightly. "Because she survived the first escape," he said. Mara frowned. "What?" "She was my only failure," Crane continued. "She escaped once. That made her extraordinary. I had to study that resilience. Rachel collapsed into sobs. You're not studying resilience, Mara said. You're obsessed with control. Crane smiled faintly. Control is the only cure for chaos. The standoff. Sirens echoed faintly from above ground as backup units surrounded the quarry entrance. Mara stepped closer. It's over, she said. You have nowhere left to run. Crane glanced toward the mine tunnel behind him, then back at Mara. Running was never my intention, he said. Before anyone could react, he pressed a small device hidden in his palm. A deep rumble shook the chamber. Dust cascaded from the ceiling as support beams groaned violently. He's collapsing the tunnel, Harris shouted. Chunks of rock crashed onto the far side of the chamber, blocking the main exit tunnel with tons of falling debris. SWAT officers scrambled for cover. Mara lunged forward, grabbing Rachel's chains as Crane calmly backed toward a narrow emergency shaft carved into the stone wall. You cannot save them all, Crane said softly. Then he disappeared into the shaft as the tunnel partially collapsed behind him. The rescue. Mara ignored the collapsing stone around them, fumbling with the chain locks securing Rachel. Key, she shouted. Harris tossed her a bolt cutter. Sparks flew as she cut through the rusted metal. Rachel collapsed into her arms, trembling uncontrollably. It's okay, Mara whispered. You're safe. You're safe now. But Mara's eyes remained locked on the blocked tunnel where Crane had vanished. Her gut told her the truth she didn't want to accept. He was still out there. The discovery. As rescue teams evacuated Rachel and secured the unstable chamber, Harris approached Mara holding something he'd found near Crane's surgical tray. A folded photograph. Mara took it carefully. Her breath caught. The photo showed Crane standing beside two other men, both wearing surgical masks, both dressed in identical lab coats. On the back of the photo, written in neat handwriting, were 4 words. The program continues forward. Mara stared at the photo, dread settling deep into her bones. Crane hadn't worked alone. And worse, he might not even be the last one. Snow blanketed the quarry as emergency crews swarmed the collapsed mine entrance. Spotlights cut through the falling flakes while paramedics rushed Rachel Dawson toward a waiting ambulance. Her fragile body trembled beneath layers of thermal blankets, oxygen mask fogging with each shallow breath. Detective Mara Ellison stood beside the ambulance doors, watching as medical staff worked frantically to stabilize Rachel. Rachel's hand suddenly shot out, grabbing Mara's sleeve. Don't stop looking for him, she whispered weakly. Mara squeezed her hand gently. I won't, she promised. Rachel's terrified eyes searched Mara's face. There are others, she whispered. He said he wasn't the only one left. The ambulance doors slammed shut, and the words settled into Mara's chest like ice. The collapse. Inside the quarry, engineers and rescue crews confirmed the worst. The emergency shaft Crane used had collapsed behind him during the detonation. Massive sections of rock had sealed the escape route entirely. Possibility he's buried inside, Harris said, scanning the structural reports. Mara stared at the jagged stone wall where Crane vanished. No, she said quietly. You don't think he's dead? Harris asked. Mara shook her head slowly. He planned everything else too carefully. The journal. Back at the task force headquarters, forensic analysts began processing the evidence recovered from Crane's slaughterhouse and quarry operations. June Patel sat across from Mara inside the evidence review room, the leather-bound journal spread open between them. You need to see this, June said, flipping to newly analyzed pages using ultraviolet scanning. Hidden writing appeared between the original entries, invisible ink layered beneath Crane's notes. Mara leaned forward. What does it say? June swallowed. It's not just one operation, Mara. It's a network. She turned the journal toward her. Encoded lists covered multiple pages. Names, dates, locations, facilities spread across different states, each labeled with identical symbols. The program, Mara whispered. June nodded. And Crane wasn't leading it. Mara's stomach dropped. Then who was? June flipped to the final decoded page. At the bottom, one name appeared repeatedly. Dr. Adrian Locke, the founder. Hours later, federal databases confirmed Adrian Locke had been a renowned behavioral psychologist specializing in extreme trauma response and survival conditioning. He vanished 20 years ago after his research funding was revoked due to ethical violations. Officially, Locke was presumed dead. Unofficially, his research had simply disappeared. Crane was a student of his, June explained. Look at this correspondence archive we recovered from Crane's servers. She opened a recovered email thread. Every message ended with the same closing line. The human mind becomes perfect through suffering. Mara felt nausea creep into her throat. How many doctors were involved? She asked quietly. June hesitated. We've identified at least 4 confirmed associates across the journal records, but there could be more. The survivors speak. Over the following weeks, survivors began sharing their experiences with investigators. Each testimony peeled back another horrifying layer of the program. They described identical psychological conditioning routines, controlled starvation cycles, sleep deprivation experiments, forced isolation therapy, and always the voice of a calm, educated man explaining that their suffering was part of growth. Clara Jennings described hearing multiple doctors speaking together during procedures. Lena Brooks recalled being transferred between facilities without ever seeing daylight. Rachel Dawson revealed something that chilled investigators the most. There was a room, she told Mara during her hospital interview. A classroom. He made us sit in rows like students. Mara leaned forward. What happened in that room? Rachel's voice shook. They made us watch recordings of other victims breaking, and called it learning. The hunt expands. Federal agencies launched a nationwide search for any facility connected to the program. Several abandoned medical buildings and research sites were raided based on journal coordinates. Most had been cleared out years earlier. But inside each location, investigators found identical surgical equipment, identical psychological testing chambers, and identical program symbols carved into the walls. It was clear. The program had been active for decades, and it was designed to survive the loss of individual members. The final clue. 3 months after Crane's disappearance, June burst into Mara's office holding a digital tablet. You need to see this, she said breathlessly. Security footage from a private European airport played on the screen. The timestamp showed only 2 weeks earlier. A tall man wearing a dark overcoat walked across the tarmac toward a private jet, his face partially obscured by sunglasses. But the facial recognition overlay blinked in confirmation. Dr. Elliot Crane, 87% match. Mara's pulse spiked. He's alive, she whispered. June nodded grimly. And look who boarded the plane before him. The footage rewound. Another man appeared on screen, older, silver-haired, walking with a cane. The system highlighted his identity. Dr. Adrian Locke, 92% match. Mara's blood ran cold. The realization. Harris leaned against the doorway, staring at the footage. They're still operating, he said quietly. Not just operating, Mara replied. They're relocating. June zoomed in on the tail number of the aircraft. Flight plan leads to a private research facility registered under shell corporations in Eastern Europe. Harris exhaled slowly. That's outside our jurisdiction. Mara stared at the screen, fury simmering beneath her calm exterior. For now. Closure. Almost. Rachel Dawson was discharged from the hospital months later. Survivors began rebuilding their lives through intensive therapy and witness protection programs. Some moved across the country. Some changed their names entirely. But they all carried scars that no court sentence could ever erase. On Rachel's final therapy exit day, she met Mara outside the clinic. Do you think they'll ever stop? Rachel asked quietly. Mara looked toward the gray sky above the city. I think people like them don't know how to stop, she said honestly. Rachel nodded slowly. But you'll keep hunting them? Mara met her gaze. Yes. Rachel smiled faintly for the first time. Good, she whispered. The final revelation. 6 months later. A quiet medical conference in Vienna buzzed with elite researchers and psychologists from around the world. Professionals mingled beneath chandeliers, exchanging theories about trauma, human resilience, and neurological evolution. Inside a private VIP lounge upstairs, 3 men sat around a polished glass table. Dr. Adrian Locke poured himself a glass of red wine, his aging face illuminated by warm golden light. Across from him sat Dr. Elliot Crane, alive, composed, untouched by justice. And beside them, A third man flipped through new patient files displayed on a tablet. "You lost several facilities," the third man said calmly. Locke smiled faintly. "Progress always requires sacrifice." Crane nodded. "The subjects provided valuable data before termination." Locke raised his glass slowly. "The program continues because humanity continues to fear growth," he said softly. The third man looked up. "And our next facility?" Locke slid a folder across the table. Inside were architectural blueprints for a newly constructed underground medical complex. On the cover page, one chilling title stood printed in bold black letters. "The next phase. Final scene." Across the ocean, Detective Mara Ellison stood alone in the task force archive room, reviewing cold case files connected to the program. Pinned across an entire wall were photographs of missing persons, survivor statements, facility maps, and one single photograph of Adrian Locke. Mara pressed a red string between Locke's photo and Crane's file. Her eyes burned with exhaustion, but her resolve never wavered, because deep down, she knew the truth. The program wasn't over. It had only gone underground, and somewhere in the world, new victims were already being chosen. Story 2. It started with a note. No fingerprints, no forced entry, just a simple piece of white paper slipped under the door of 23 Cedar Lane in the sleepy town of Hollow Creek. Detective Nathan Reyes found it early Monday morning, the sun barely cutting through the thick fog that hugged the quiet street. The note read, in perfect block letters, "We've been watching. You will disappear next." Nathan stared at the paper, a chill crawling up his spine. Cedar Lane wasn't the kind of street where threats arrived by mail. People left doors unlocked, waved to neighbors, and trusted the police to investigate the occasional petty theft or drunken fight. But this was different. Across the street, a neighbor called in a missing person report. Lila Hammond, 32, mother of 2, had not been seen since Friday night. Her husband, Tom, frantic and pale, explained she had gone out for a jog and never returned. Her car remained in the driveway, keys still in the ignition. Her phone? Gone. Wallet? Missing. Nathan crouched beside the driveway, examining the footprints in the damp grass. They were faint but uneven, like someone had struggled, fought even, before vanishing into the woods at the end of the lane. "Neighbor saw someone near the tree line?" Nathan asked. Tom shook his head violently. "No one. Just gone. Like she walked into thin air." Nathan frowned. Thin air didn't leave prints. The investigation began immediately. Hollow Creek wasn't equipped to handle this kind of disappearance. Nathan called in the State Bureau, bringing in specialists in abductions and criminal profiling. By evening, the media had descended on Cedar Lane. Cameras flashed across foggy lawns, reporters asking the same questions over and over. Who could take a woman in the middle of a quiet town? Was she targeted, or was this random? Nathan, however, had a gut feeling. Lila Hammond's disappearance was not random. Whoever left the note had chosen her carefully. The first break came late that night. A local hiker reported finding a strange symbol carved into the bark of an old oak tree near the edge of the woods. It was a spiral, almost hypnotic, with a small dot at the center, something Nathan didn't recognize. But he knew instinctively, this was a calling card. Someone was sending a message. And the message was clear: Cedar Lane was next. The night closed in, and Hollow Creek slept uneasily. Streetlights flickered against the mist, and from the shadows, Nathan could almost hear the soft rustle of movement, as if the trees themselves were watching. A feeling of dread settled over him. Lila Hammond was only the beginning, and whoever had taken her was still out there, waiting for their next victim. The morning after Lila Hammond's disappearance, Cedar Lane felt hollow. The usual morning chatter of joggers and dog walkers had vanished, replaced by a muted tension. Windows were shuttered. Mailboxes remained unopened. Even the wind seemed reluctant to move through the fog that hung thick over Hollow Creek. Detective Nathan Reyes pulled into the driveway of 23 Cedar Lane, his boots crunching over damp gravel. He had spent the night reviewing the few pieces of evidence collected: the anonymous note, the faint footprints leading into the woods, and the spiral carving on the oak tree. It wasn't much, but something about it nagged at him. The spiral wasn't random. Patterns like that were deliberate, a signature. Someone wanted to send a message. He stepped into Lila's home. The front door had been locked, but a spare key under the mat made it simple for police access. Inside, everything appeared undisturbed. Tom Hammond, Lila's husband, was sitting on the couch, staring blankly at the wall as if he expected her to walk in at any second. "Nathan," Tom muttered without looking up. "I don't understand. She went for a jog. It's 5 blocks to the park, maybe 10 if she wandered. She's never been gone this long. It doesn't make sense." Nathan pulled out his notebook. "Tom, I know this is hard, but we need to go over her last known movements. Anything unusual before she left Friday night?" Tom shook his head. "No. Same routine. Coffee at 6:30 a.m., jogging shoes on by 7. Sometimes she stops at the corner store, but that's it." Nathan frowned. Something was off. Too off. Most abductions weren't so clean-cut. Usually there were witnesses, signs of struggle, or surveillance footage. Lila had none of that. No phone, no wallet, no reason to vanish. Whoever had taken her had planned this meticulously. The hidden drawer. Nathan began a methodical search of Lila's home, starting with her office. Her laptop sat on the desk, password protected. He called in a forensic analyst to bypass it. While waiting, he moved to a filing cabinet beside her desk. The top drawer contained mundane household bills and insurance documents. But the second drawer was different. It was locked with a small keyhole. Nathan noticed the keyhole had fine scratches around it, like it had been forced open before. "Tom," Nathan asked carefully, "did Lila ever keep a diary or personal journal?" Tom's face tightened. She kept a journal sometimes. Nothing big. Just thoughts about work and the kids." "Why?" Nathan nodded and carefully lifted the drawer. Inside were envelopes, all addressed in the same neat handwriting, but with no stamps. They looked like letters never sent. One envelope fell to the floor. Nathan picked it up. Inside was a single photo. It was of a man standing in front of the woods near Cedar Lane. His face was shadowed, but his stance was deliberate, almost confrontational. In the background, barely visible, was a small spiral carved into the bark of a tree. The same symbol Nathan had seen the day before. He flipped over the photo. On the back, written in pencil, were 2 words. "He waits." A second disappearance. Before Nathan could absorb the meaning, his phone rang. It was dispatch. "Detective Reyes, we've got a report of a second missing person," the dispatcher said. "Same neighborhood. 27 Cedar Lane. A woman named Marcy Linton, 34. Last seen leaving her home last night around 11 p.m. Neighbors heard nothing." Nathan's stomach tightened. 2 disappearances on the same street in less than 72 hours. That wasn't coincidence. It was a pattern. "I'm on my way," Nathan said. "Investigating 27 Cedar Lane." Marcy Linton's home was eerily similar to Lila's, quiet, orderly, with no signs of struggle. But something in the air felt different. Nathan and 2 officers entered cautiously. They found a window slightly ajar at the back of the house. Broken glass on the windowsill indicated it had been forced from the outside. Nathan moved toward it, examining the surrounding grass. Footprints led into the woods, faint but fresh. "Looks like she didn't go far," one of the officers said. Nathan frowned. He bent down and noticed something odd. Another spiral symbol, carved into a small tree beside the trail. Only this one was different. Instead of a dot in the center, there were 2 small vertical scratches beside the spiral. A message. Nathan's mind raced. Whoever was behind this wasn't random. They were marking their victims, planning something bigger. The spiral pattern. Back at headquarters, Nathan and forensic analyst June Patel began mapping out the spiral symbols from both Cedar Lane homes. "Look at this," June said, overlaying the map on her computer screen. "Lila's spiral is here. Marcy's is here. And I found 5 more symbols like these in the woods surrounding Hollow Creek over the past month." Nathan leaned over the screen. 5 more? Missing persons?" June nodded. 3 officially reported as gone. 2 never reported. Nobody ever connected them until now. Nathan's jaw tightened. The spirals weren't just marks. They were a trail, a breadcrumb path. A predatory map leading to something. "And the placement?" Nathan asked. "Seems random at first," June said. "But if you connect them, they form a rough spiral pattern. Almost like a vortex." Nathan's blood ran cold. A signature. A ritual. The first lead. By evening, Nathan drove to Hollow Creek Park, following the latest spiral marker found near Marcy Linton's disappearance. The woods were thick and oppressive. A dense fog settled over the underbrush, limiting visibility to a few feet. Nathan moved carefully, flashlight cutting through the gray mist. Every sound, rustling leaves, distant birds, made him flinch. He found the spiral carved into a maple tree. Fresh, moist, blood-red stains on the bark. Bloody, Nathan whispered, examining the pattern. It wasn't blood paint. Red acrylic, carefully applied. He continued along the path. Something caught his eye, a small, metallic object partially buried in the mud. He crouched and picked it up. A USB drive. The contents. Back at headquarters, Nathan and June plugged the drive into a secure computer. The files were encrypted, but with some effort, June unlocked them. Inside were hundreds of photos and videos, all documenting missing persons from Hollow Creek over the past 10 years. Surveillance footage, home videos, even candid street shots. Each subject had a spiral symbol marked somewhere nearby in the frame. Nathan's stomach twisted. Whoever was doing this had been active for a decade, hidden in plain sight, and meticulous in recording every movement of their victims. Then a video caught his eye. It was labeled, Cedar Lane Initiation, 2026. The footage showed Lila Hammond and Marcy Linton, taken from angles that suggested hidden cameras. The women appeared restrained, looking terrified, and in the background a man. Tall, dark, unidentifiable face. But in his hand, he held a carving tool, the same used for the spiral symbols. Nathan's hands shook. He's here. Right here in Cedar Lane. A message for Nathan. The last file on the drive was different. A short video, just 20 seconds. The man was now facing the camera. His face obscured by shadows, voice modulated. "You think you can stop us, Detective Reyes?" he said. "You're part of the pattern now. Cedar Lane was only the beginning. Watch closely, or you'll vanish next." Nathan hit the pause button, staring at the screen. June whispered, "This isn't just a local case, this is organized, controlled, and ritualistic." Nathan exhaled slowly. "And they've been planning it a long time. Too long to make mistakes." He looked out the window at Cedar Lane, quiet under the misty night sky. 2 disappearances, a trail of symbols, a decade-long pattern, and a predator who knew him by name. Someone was always watching, and they had made sure Nathan knew it. The fog hung thicker than ever over Hollow Creek as Detective Nathan Reyes drove toward the town archives. Every street looked the same, muffled under a gray blanket of winter mist. Cedar Lane was quiet, almost too quiet. Houses shuttered, no movement. Nathan knew the town was holding its breath, waiting for answers he didn't yet have. He parked outside the archives, an old brick building at the edge of town. The large oak doors groaned as he pushed them open. Inside, the smell of old paper and dust hit him instantly. Rows upon rows of shelves were lined with yellowed documents, bound ledgers, and brittle newspapers. This was history, literal history, and Nathan hoped it contained clues to the spiral pattern terrorizing the town. For hours, he sifted through old reports, newspaper clippings, and police records dating back over 50 years. One thing became clear. Hollow Creek had a history of disappearances, strange, unsolved, and all seemingly unconnected until now. Patterns of the past. A particular series of cases caught Nathan's attention. From the early 1970s to the late 1990s, there had been reports of young adults vanishing near the outskirts of Hollow Creek. Most were never found, but the details were eerily similar. Each disappearance occurred during foggy or rainy nights. In nearly every case, local residents reported seeing spiral symbols carved into nearby trees or walls. Witnesses described seeing a tall man lurking near the victims before they vanished. Nathan scribbled notes in his notebook, connecting the cases. The spirals weren't new. They were decades old. Someone had revived the ritual, following a script that had survived generations. A particularly chilling note from a 1983 case caught his attention. It described a teenage girl who vanished from the same park where the spiral symbol had been found recently. The case file mentioned a secret society in Hollow Creek, an underground group obsessed with rituals and psychological control. The society's name was redacted in the police file, but the initials were clear, CLOSE. Nathan leaned back, a chill creeping down his spine. The spiral wasn't just a signature, it was a symbol of this society. The secret society. Nathan's next stop was the Hollow Creek Historical Society, a small, cluttered office downtown. He met with the archivist, an elderly woman named Margaret Lane, whose family had lived in Hollow Creek for generations. "I've lived here all my life," Margaret said, adjusting her glasses. "And I've heard stories people don't talk about." Nathan leaned forward. "Stories about CLOSC?" Margaret's eyes widened. She glanced around nervously before nodding. "Yes. Closed meetings, secret rituals. They claimed to be protecting the town from something. But over the years, the disappearances started, and the stories got darker. Most people left it alone, buried it in silence. But it never ended." Nathan felt a knot tighten in his stomach. "Do you know if it's still active?" Margaret shook her head. "No one would admit it. But the symbols, the spirals, people say they mark the chosen. The ones the society decides to take for training, or sacrifice, depending on which story you hear." Nathan frowned. The ritualistic element was escalating. Whoever was behind the recent disappearances wasn't random. They were part of something far larger, something hidden for decades. The predator's escalation. Back at Cedar Lane, Nathan reviewed the footage from the USB drive again. Lila and Marcy had been recorded for hours, their terror palpable. But there was something he hadn't noticed before. In the background of one clip, near the tree-line, a second figure appeared. A shadow, tall, lean, indistinct. Watching. Not Dr. Crane, or any predator Nathan had imagined. Someone else. He rewound the clip. The figure moved with deliberate precision, staying just out of focus, always observing but never intervening. The presence was deliberate. A second predator. Or maybe a partner, someone orchestrating the events alongside the first. Nathan's pulse quickened. Whoever was behind CLOSC had accomplices. And they were coordinating, planning, interviewing locals. Nathan spent the next morning canvassing Cedar Lane. Most residents were frightened, wary of speaking. But a few whispered of strange occurrences over the past year. A neighbor claimed to see hooded figures in the woods at night. Another said she discovered spiral carvings on the trees in her backyard, but thought it was children playing. A third mentioned odd deliveries of surgical equipment to abandoned properties. The consistency of the reports confirmed Nathan's suspicion. Hollow Creek was being used as a testing ground. The predators weren't improvising. They were following a long-established system, one that trained them to manipulate, abduct, and terrorize with surgical precision. The victims' families. Nathan contacted families of previous victims whose disappearances had gone cold. He found a disturbing pattern. All victims' families had experienced harassment, anonymous threats, or minor break-ins before their loved ones vanished. The predators weren't just taking people. They were psychologically conditioning them beforehand, isolating them, watching them, studying them. One mother, Elizabeth Turner, who lost her son in 1998, whispered to Nathan during a meeting in a quiet cafe. "They're like shadows, invisible, always present. And if you try to find them, they disappear. But they always know who you are." Nathan felt a familiar chill. That was the same feeling he'd experienced with Lila and Marcy. The predator, or predators, knew him. The spiral network. Back at the precinct, Nathan and June began mapping all known spiral symbols across Hollow Creek. When connected, they formed a crude but deliberate pattern, spanning almost the entire town. "This is more than a signature," June said, tracing lines on the digital map. "This is a network. They're organizing territory. Every symbol marks a zone, a perimeter. They're claiming these areas." Nathan leaned over the screen. And Cedar Lane was the center of the spiral. June nodded. "Yes, they're escalating. It's almost like they're drawing a map to something bigger, or someone bigger." Nathan's eyes narrowed. He didn't like the implication. If the predators had been planning this for decades, they weren't just taking victims, they were building towards something. Something monumental. The threat intensifies. That evening, Nathan returned to Cedar Lane. The fog was thicker now, clinging to the trees like wet fabric. His phone buzzed. A new message had been left anonymously. No email. No number. Just another note, slipped under the precinct door when he wasn't looking. "You're part of the pattern now. Watch your steps. Cedar Lane will claim more." Nathan crumpled the note, anger and dread mixing into a tight knot in his chest. They were taunting him. Not just taking victims, they were playing a psychological game, and he was the next target. He looked up at the trees lining the lane, the shadows thickening as night fell. Somewhere in the darkness, the predators were watching, waiting, planning the next move. And Nathan knew one truth. Hollow Creek wasn't just the setting. It was the stage. A new lead. As Nathan returned to the precinct, June approached him with a folder. "Detective, I cross-referenced the old CLOSE cases with the current disappearances," she said. "I found something. All victims were last seen near a building that was either abandoned or under construction. Some of them were hospitals or research facilities." Nathan's mind raced. If these predators had been using Hollow Creek as a training ground for decades, where were they sending their victims? What were they doing with them? The answer, he suspected, would be worse than anything he had imagined. The first snow of the season had begun to fall, blanketing Hollow Creek in an almost serene white. But serenity was a lie. Detective Nathan Reyes knew it, every instinct screaming that danger lurked just beneath the surface. Cedar Lane had become a hunting ground, and the spirals marking the victims' paths were more than symbols, they were guides. Nathan's plan was simple. Follow the spiral trail from Cedar Lane into the abandoned industrial district at the edge of town. Previous disappearances had all led here, but the exact location had remained a mystery. He parked his SUV near an old brick building that had once served as a textile mill. Its windows were shattered, graffiti covering the walls, and the metal doors rusted shut. This was the kind of place no one visited after dark, perfect for someone who wanted to remain unseen. Entering the abyss, Nathan approached cautiously, flashlight cutting through the darkness. He pried open the metal door with a crowbar, the screech echoing across the empty lot. Inside, the smell hit him first, damp concrete, mold, and something metallic. Blood? It was too faint to be sure. The main floor was vast and empty, save for old machinery left to rust. Spiral symbols were carved into the walls in several locations. They were larger than the ones found outside, 3 feet across in some cases, and freshly painted crimson. "This isn't random," Nathan muttered. "They want us to find it, or they want to taunt us." Footsteps echoed from the upper level. Nathan froze, listening. They were deliberate, slow, steady. Not the kind of footsteps someone panicking would make. He pulled out his service pistol and climbed the metal stairs carefully. Each step groaned beneath his weight, but he moved as silently as he could. The first discovery. On the second floor, he found a door marked with another spiral. It was padlocked, but the lock had been cut. Inside, the room was small, barely larger than a storage closet. Chains hung from the walls, along with hooks and restraints. Nathan's stomach turned. These weren't just symbols. These were facilities for confinement. He found a journal in the corner, soaked in dust. Flipping through it, he recognized the handwriting from the USB drive, meticulous, precise, clinical. Names were listed, victims, targets, dates of abduction. Some names were crossed out, others were circled. Nathan's heart pounded. Lila Hammond and Marcy Linton were both circled. And at the bottom of the list, written in bold letters, Initiation, Cedar Lane. Next, the Watchers. Hidden passage. While examining the room, Nathan noticed a section of the wall slightly ajar. Behind it, a narrow stairwell descended into darkness. He hesitated for a moment, then grabbed his flashlight and descended. The air grew colder, damper, and the faint smell of iron intensified. The tunnel widened into a cavernous underground network. Concrete walls were reinforced, pipes ran along the ceiling, and more spiral symbols were painted on the walls. Somewhere deeper, he could hear muffled voices, whispers, cries, and occasionally the scrape of metal. Nathan's pulse raced. The victims weren't just being held, they were being trained, observed, and tortured. Whoever ran this network had been preparing it for decades. The first encounter. Nathan moved deeper into the tunnels, careful to remain silent. Shadows shifted ahead. Then a figure appeared, masked tall, dressed in black. The figure didn't attack immediately, but raised a hand in a slow, deliberate motion. "Who's there?" Nathan called, keeping his pistol aimed. The figure tilted their head. A voice came, distorted. "You shouldn't have come here, Detective Reyes. You're too late for the others." Before Nathan could react, the figure vanished down a side passage. He He ran after them, but found only an empty hallway lined with more spiral symbols, each one larger and more grotesque than the last. The hidden facility. The main chamber of the underground network was horrifying. Rows of cells lined the walls, each holding someone restrained. Some victims were awake, staring blankly. Others were unconscious, hooked to medical devices Nathan had never seen before. At the far end, a large observation deck overlooked the room. Through the glass, Nathan could see the predator, tall, lean, wearing a surgical mask and gloves, standing in front of a console, manipulating levers and dials connected to the restraints below. It was Dr. Marcus Vale. The name sent a shock through Nathan. Vale had been a renowned behavioral psychologist presumed dead after a scandal involving unethical experiments. And here he was, alive, orchestrating a new generation of terror in Hollow Creek. The ritual. Vale turned to a whiteboard, on which symbols and diagrams were scrawled in red ink. The spirals matched those Nathan had seen outside. They weren't just random, they were part of a ritual, a system designed to break the mind while testing limits of endurance, fear, and obedience. Nathan realized the scale of it. Lila and Marcy weren't just victims. They were subjects in a long-running experiment stretching decades, with connections to the original CLOSE society. Vale spoke calmly to an assistant. Subject 23 shows resilience. Increase the isolation period. Observe and record. The assistant nodded, and Nathan felt bile rise in his throat. They weren't just holding people, they were conditioning them. A close call. Nathan tried to call for backup, but the underground network blocked radio signals. He needed another way out. Slowly, he retraced his steps, careful not to alert Vale or the assistants. But then a faint click. The sound of a door locking behind him. Detective Reyes. Vale's voice echoed through the tunnels, cold and clinical. You should have stayed outside. Now you're part of the observation. Nathan's mind raced. There was no way he could face Vale and the assistants head-on. He needed a plan, and fast. The spiral's secret. Nathan's flashlight caught a detail on the wall. One of the spirals was different. In its center was a small, hollow indentation like a keyhole. He ran his hand over it, realizing it could be the lock to a hidden mechanism. He pulled a metal rod from his belt and pressed it into the hole. The wall shuddered and slowly swung open, revealing a narrow escape corridor. Nathan didn't hesitate. He slipped through, keeping low, heart pounding. Behind him, Vale's voice faded into the distance. You cannot escape what is designed to endure. Nathan emerged into the cold night, the snow falling softly over Hollow Creek. He had survived, but the underground network remained active, the victims trapped, and Vale's ritual ongoing. The realization. Back in his SUV, Nathan pulled out the journal and the USB drive, staring at the names and spiral symbols. Hollow Creek's history of disappearances, the underground network, Vale's return, it was all connected. And now, the predator knew Nathan was watching. The spiral pattern wasn't just a signature. It was a warning, a map, and a threat all at once. Someone in Hollow Creek had been planning this for decades, and Nathan realized with grim certainty. The spiral network was bigger than anyone could have imagined. Cedar Lane was only the beginning, and the predators were still out there. Detective Nathan Reyes didn't sleep that night. Hollow Creek streets, once quiet and familiar, now felt suffocating, every shadow a possible threat. The underground network he had discovered haunted him. Vale's victims, restrained and conditioned, were still down there. And Vale himself had seen him, knew he was close. Nathan needed answers. Not just about the spirals or the victims, but about Vale. To stop the predator, he had to understand him. A history of shadows. Nathan began his research in the precinct's cold, fluorescent-lit archive room. June Patel sat beside him, cross-referencing old newspaper clippings with the information from the USB drive and journal. Marcus Vale was considered brilliant, June said, flipping through a 20-year-old journal. Behavioral psychologist, specializing in trauma and resilience testing. But in the early 2000s, he vanished from public life after allegations of unethical experiments. Most assumed he fled or was dead. Nathan frowned. But he didn't vanish clearly. No, June replied. He's been active all this time, probably under the radar. There are gaps in his timeline, but all missing persons reports, Cedar Lane, Hollow Creek, and the other disappearances, line up perfectly with his known patterns. Nathan leaned back, So he's been conducting experiments for decades, possibly using Hollow Creek as a base because of its isolation and history. June nodded grimly. And the spiral, it's a signature, a psychological brand. He wants recognition, even if no one sees it. Each spiral marks a stage of control, a zone of influence. Nathan felt a shiver. Vale wasn't just a predator. He was a methodical scientist, obsessed with control, observation, and psychological domination. Interview with a survivor. The next morning, Nathan arranged to meet Claire Abbott, a survivor from a decade-old disappearance who had managed to escape. She had lived under an assumed identity ever since. Claire was fragile-looking, but had a fire in her eyes. She spoke softly, almost afraid of every shadow, but the details she provided were chilling. "They call themselves the Society," she said, voice shaking. "CLOSE. They select their victims carefully. They watch for weaknesses, insecurities. Then they isolate you. The spirals? Those were maps for them. Markers for where we could be controlled. Where we would break." Nathan's heart raced. "How many are there?" Claire's gaze hardened. "More than you can imagine. Hollow Creek is only one of their bases. There are others all connected. And Marcus Vale, he's not alone." She paused, swallowing hard. "He has partners. Accomplices. People who've been trained in his methods, just like us." Nathan's hand tightened around his coffee mug. He had suspected as much after the shadowy figure in the footage. Vale wasn't working alone. The psychology of terror. Nathan and June spent the afternoon analyzing Vale's methods. Patterns emerged. Victims were carefully selected and observed for months. Isolation was gradual, psychological manipulation incremental. Fear was a tool. Minor threats escalated into life-threatening situations, conditioning the mind to obey. Each victim had been tested against previous ones, lessons learned, adjustments made. The spiral pattern itself, June explained, is a form of psychological conditioning. It's visually repetitive and pervasive. Once a victim sees it repeatedly, it triggers fear and obedience. It's Pavlovian but elevated. Nathan shook his head. And the network underground, that's the culmination. Controlled environments, every reaction observed, every fear exploited. It's monstrous. June nodded. And it's expanding. With every disappearance, Vale refines his methods, recruits new assistants, and increases the network's reach. Hollow Creek is just a node in a larger system. Another victim. The next day news broke. Another disappearance, this time Daniel Price, a college student living near the outskirts of Hollow Creek. His apartment had been ransacked, items missing. His roommate found spiral symbols etched into the window frames. Nathan knew immediately it was Vale's work. The escalation was no longer gradual, it was rapid. The predator was gaining confidence, pushing boundaries, and leaving clear signs of his presence. Nathan and June went to the site. Spiral symbols were fresh, carved into wood with precise, deliberate strokes. Blood-red paint smeared over parts of the design. "This isn't just terrorizing individuals anymore," Nathan said, voice tight. "He's sending a message to the whole town." June nodded. "And he knows we're watching." Nathan's fists clenched. Vale wasn't just creating victims, he was challenging them, and the detectives pursuing him. Tracing the spiral. Using historical data, Nathan mapped all known spiral occurrences, linking each one to a missing person or witness report. The results were horrifying. Over 30 documented cases in Hollow Creek over 50 years. The pattern formed concentric spirals across the town, each spiral zone corresponding to different levels of influence and control. The most recent spirals converged near Cedar Lane, confirming that Vale considered this area a testing ground, central to his experiments. Nathan realized the spirals weren't just marks, they were coordinates. A map of his victims, his territory, and his experimentation. "This is meticulous," Nathan said. "Decades of planning, decades of execution. He's not just a criminal, he's a tactician, a strategist." June shivered. "And a sadist." The trap. Late that evening, Nathan received an anonymous tip. A spiral symbol had appeared at the entrance of the abandoned Hollow Creek Hospital. The building had been closed for years, yet the symbol was fresh. Nathan knew it was a trap, but he couldn't ignore it. Armed and cautious, he approached the building. Snowflakes drifted through broken windows as he entered, flashlight cutting through the darkness. Inside, the hospital smelled of decay, damp walls, and something metallic. Spiral symbols were everywhere, on doors, walls, even the floor. Nathan's pulse quickened. Each step echoed. He was being led deeper into Vale's territory. At the end of a long hallway, he found a door slightly ajar. Muffled voices and metallic clinking sounded from within. Nathan's instincts screamed. Someone was being held there. He raised his pistol and stepped inside. The horror unveiled. The room was small, sterile, and terrifyingly methodical. Chairs with restraints were bolted to the floor, surgical tools laid out neatly on stainless steel trays. A single spiral symbol dominated the wall, painted in deep crimson. And then he saw them, two victims bound and gagged, eyes wide with fear. Lila Hammond and Marcy Linton. Alive, but clearly traumatized. Nathan's heart raced. "It's okay," he whispered. "You're safe now. I'm getting you out." A shadow moved behind the glass partition. Vale was watching, his eyes cold, calculating. "Detective Reyes," Vale said, voice calm, measured. "You're finally seeing the pattern. But it's too late. You can't undo what has begun." Nathan realized with a chill that this was more than a trap. It was a demonstration. Vale wanted him to see the victims, to understand the extent of control. It was psychological warfare on the detective himself. The revelation. While securing the victims, Nathan noticed something even more disturbing. A set of floor plans and documents on a desk. They outlined multiple hidden facilities, recruitment schedules, and experimental protocols, spanning cities, states, even internationally. Vale's network wasn't local. Hollow Creek was just a central hub in a global operation. The spiral patterns, the CLOSE society, the decades of disappearances. It was all part of an organized system designed to manipulate, control, and terrorize. Nathan felt the weight of it all. Vale wasn't just a predator. He was the mastermind of a network of horrors, meticulously planned and executed over decades. And now, he was escalating, targeting anyone who came too close. The fight begins. Nathan backed the victims out quietly, calling in backup once they were safely in the SUV. The night air was cold, crisp, and smelled faintly of snow and pine. Lila and Marcy were trembling but alive. Nathan's thoughts raced. Vale was still out there, and the network he had built was vast, sophisticated, and ruthless. The hunt wasn't over. It was only beginning. He stared at the darkness surrounding Hollow Creek, knowing one truth. The predator had been planning this for decades, and stopping him would require more than courage. It would require understanding the mind behind the terror. Nathan clenched his fists. Vale had turned Hollow Creek into his laboratory of fear, and he wasn't finished. This was no longer just an investigation. It was a war. The Hollow Creek winter was unforgiving. Snow clung to the streets and rooftops, creating a deceptive calm over the town. But for Detective Nathan Reyes, there was no calm. Only the chilling knowledge that Marcus Vale's network stretched far beyond Cedar Lane, and each day brought new horrors. After rescuing Lila Hammond and Marcy Linton, Nathan spent hours debriefing them. Both women were fragile, traumatized, and haunted by what they had endured. Yet, they provided crucial insight into Vale's operations. "They're everywhere," Marcy whispered, hands shaking. "Not just here. There are facilities, networks, people watching, recording everything. And he has partners. Some of them, trained like soldiers." Nathan nodded grimly. This wasn't just a local threat. Hollow Creek was a node in a much larger machine, one that had been running for decades. Vale had been methodical, precise, and surgical in his abductions, leaving no trace for authorities until Nathan had arrived. Vale's past exposed. Back at the precinct, Nathan pored over historical documents and case files dating back to the early 1980s. Marcus Vale had started as a clinical psychologist at Hollow Creek University, conducting research on trauma, obedience, and resilience. At first, his experiments were sanctioned and celebrated, but gradually, ethical lines were crossed. His first documented incident involved students who disappeared for days during isolation studies. Authorities never linked him directly, dismissing it as a prank. In the late 1980s, Vale began using his students to recruit others. Those who didn't comply disappeared, leaving only spiral symbols at the scene. By the early 1990s, Vale was working with other rogue psychologists under the umbrella of a secret society, CLOSE. whose members were sworn to secrecy and ritualistic experimentation. Nathan traced Vale's methods through decades of disappearances, meticulous observation, psychological conditioning, and carefully orchestrated terror. Hollow Creek had been a training ground for a system designed to extend far beyond the town, eventually targeting other cities and states. "He's not just a predator," Nathan said, voice tight. "He's a strategist, a manipulator, a teacher for others who follow his methods." June Patel, his partner in analysis, nodded gravely. "And he's expanding. Every recent disappearance suggests he's training accomplices, creating a network of operatives to replicate his methods elsewhere." Nathan's jaw clenched. "We're not just fighting him. We're fighting an entire organization." A new disappearance. 2 days later, another Cedar Lane resident vanished. This time, it was Gideon Clark, a local handyman. Witnesses reported seeing him near the woods late at night, apparently meeting someone. Spiral symbols were carved into trees around the area, fresh and glistening under the snow. Nathan arrived at the scene, flashlight cutting through the mist. Fresh footprints led into the dense forest, perfectly aligned with spiral markings on several trees. The predator's signature. The calculated precision. "This is escalating," Nathan muttered to himself. "He's sending a message. He's showing us how much control he has." Following the spiral, Nathan decided to trace the spiral network deeper into the abandoned industrial sector. The spirals weren't just symbols, they were a map, guiding him through the predator's world. Every turn, every marking, brought him closer to Vale's inner operations. He approached a warehouse at the edge of town, a site previously thought abandoned. Snow crunched underfoot, echoing in the silence. The front door was ajar, and inside, spirals were painted in red across the walls, floors, and support beams. Nathan moved cautiously. The air was damp and heavy, smelling of mold, rust, and faint traces of antiseptic. Somewhere in the distance, a door creaked, a mechanical sound that indicated human presence. Then he saw it, surveillance cameras. Hidden in the corners, tiny and black, angled perfectly to record every movement. Vale had eyes everywhere. The underground network. Nathan descended a metal staircase at the rear of the warehouse. The stairs led to a concrete corridor lined with doors. Each room was sealed, yet faint sounds of human voices, muffled cries, and movement echoed from behind them. He opened one door to reveal a small holding cell. 2 young men sat huddled on the floor, restraints on their wrists and ankles. Fear radiated from them, and their eyes widened at Nathan's presence. "Detective Reyes," Nathan said softly, kneeling to reassure them. "You're safe now. We're getting you out." But even as he freed them, he noticed something chilling. All the rooms were wired with cameras, microphones, and sensors. Vale wasn't just holding people. He was studying them, collecting data, analyzing reactions. Each victim was a subject, each cell a laboratory. Nathan's heart sank. The scale of Vale's operations was unimaginable. Hollow Creek wasn't just a hub. It was the prototype for a global network of terror. The first confrontation. As Nathan moved deeper into the network, he heard the sound of footsteps behind him. He spun, pistol drawn, but no one was visible. Then a voice came, calm and measured. "Detective Reyes, you really shouldn't be here." Vale emerged from the shadows, mask and gloves on, his tall frame dominating the narrow corridor. Nathan raised his pistol. "Vale, step away from the victims." Vale smiled behind his mask. "They're already conditioned. Every reaction, every fear. I've observed them all. And now I observe you." Vale took a slow step forward. "Do you understand, detective? I don't abduct randomly. I select, I watch, I refine. Cedar Lane, it's not just a location. It's a training ground. And you are my newest observation." Nathan's grip tightened on his pistol. "You'll never get away with this." Vale laughed softly. "I already have. And soon you'll understand. The spiral isn't just a symbol. It's the path. The path to control. To perfection. And you are part of it now." A narrow escape. Nathan lunged, but Vale was fast, sidestepping and disappearing down a side passage. Nathan gave chase, adrenaline surging through him. The corridors twisted and turned, spirals painted on every wall, guiding him like a maze. He stumbled upon a room filled with monitors displaying live feeds of other facilities, some in Hollow Creek, some in neighboring towns. Vale had created a vast network, observing and controlling his victims in real time. Nathan realized with horror, Vale wasn't just a local predator. He was the leader of a sophisticated organization, using psychological warfare and technological surveillance to maintain control over dozens of victims simultaneously. Nathan had to escape before Vale circled back. He found a ventilation shaft, pried it open, and crawled through the narrow, dark tunnel. Outside, the snow was falling heavily. He emerged breathless, covered in grime, but alive. A growing fear. Back at the precinct, Nathan debriefed June and the task force. The scope of Vale's operations was staggering. Spiral symbols weren't just markings. They were nodes, points of control, connecting facilities and victims across Hollow Creek and beyond. The spiral network is everywhere, June said, voice shaking. And he's escalating. Each disappearance, each victim, it's part of a system, a method. Nathan stared out the window at the quiet town blanketed in snow. Hollow Creek looked peaceful, but the predator was active, organized, and always watching. We need to strike at the heart of this network, Nathan said. Find Vale's command center, locate the other victims, and stop him before he expands further. June nodded. But he's prepared for that. Every facility is connected. Every victim is a data point. He's ready for us. Nathan's fists clenched. Vale had turned Hollow Creek into a laboratory of terror, a web of psychological and physical control. And now Nathan was caught in it. The spiral network wasn't just a pattern, it was a machine, and Vale was the engineer. The stakes rise. That night, Nathan couldn't sleep. He replayed every piece of footage, every spiral symbol, every victim statement. One truth was undeniable. Vale was intelligent, meticulous, and sadistic beyond comprehension. And worse, he had been preparing for decades, evolving his methods with every success and failure. Hollow Creek was his testing ground, and Nathan realized with grim certainty, stopping him would require more than courage. It would require strategy, precision, and nerves of steel. The detective looked out at the falling snow, the town quiet beneath the winter sky. The predators weren't done. The spiral network was expanding, and Vale's experiments were growing more ambitious. Somewhere, hidden beneath the snow and shadows, new victims were already being selected. And Nathan knew one thing. The next strike would come, and he had to be ready. This was no longer just an investigation. It was a war against a mind that had mastered fear, control, and obsession. Detective Nathan Reyes had faced many criminals in his career, but nothing compared to what he was dealing with now. Marcus Vale was not just a predator. He was the culmination of decades of psychological manipulation, careful planning, and systematic terror. And the deeper Nathan delved, the clearer it became that Vale was only part of a much larger organization, the secret society known as CLOSC. The night after the warehouse operation, Nathan couldn't stop thinking about the spiral network. Every spiral symbol he had seen wasn't just a signature. It was a code, a map, a psychological trigger. Vale's operations weren't random. They were methodical, expanding like a virus, infecting Hollow Creek and beyond. June Patel arrived at the precinct with a stack of old documents she had acquired from the Hollow Creek Historical Society. Among the faded papers were photographs, handwritten journals, and meeting notes detailing decades of activity within CLOSC. They go back further than we thought, June said, her voice low. The 1970s. Hollow Creek has been a laboratory for their experiments for over 50 years. Nathan took a deep breath and gestured toward the files. Show me everything, the society revealed. As they pored over the documents, a chilling picture emerged. CLOSC was more than just a secret society. It was an organization devoted to psychological and behavioral manipulation, training its members to abduct, control, and study human behavior in the most extreme conditions. The earliest records described the group as a clandestine circle of psychologists, researchers, and influential townsfolk. Their stated goal was to cultivate resilience and perfection through controlled observation and experimentation. In practice, this meant identifying vulnerable individuals, isolating them, and subjecting them to a system of fear, conditioning, and surveillance. One entry from 1978 stood out. We have begun marking the chosen. The spiral symbol shall signify the locus of control. Observation must remain constant. All reactions recorded. Deviations noted. We are the unseen hands shaping the mind. Nathan felt a chill run down his spine. The spiral wasn't just Vale's signature. It was the society's emblem, a methodical way of marking territory and influence over its victims. Vale's apprentices. Further documents revealed the society's long-term plan to train successors who could replicate the methods of psychological control across generations. Marcus Vale had been one of their most promising protégés. By the 1990s, he had assumed control of the Hollow Creek network, applying his own experimental refinements. One particular file contained a ledger of apprentices, young psychologists and researchers who had been inducted into the society. Some names were crossed out, either discredited or disappeared entirely. Others were marked with spirals, indicating ongoing training. Vale isn't working alone, Nathan said grimly. He has a network of trained operatives. They're all capable of what he's doing here. June nodded. And the spirals aren't just psychological triggers. They're a communication method, a map of their operations, and a way to mark progress. Every victim, every location, every reaction, it all feeds back into the system. Nathan leaned back, processing the enormity of it. Hollow Creek wasn't just a site of abductions. It was a laboratory, a training ground, and a testing environment for a centuries-old network of control. A new target. While Nathan and June were examining the files, an urgent call came in. A new disappearance had been reported. Sophie Ellis, a young woman who had recently moved to Cedar Lane. Her apartment showed no signs of forced entry, but spiral symbols were etched into the walls and furniture. Nathan felt a familiar knot of dread. Vale was escalating, and the spiral network was expanding. This was no longer a local phenomenon. It was becoming systemic. He and June rushed to the scene. Snow was falling heavily, blanketing the streets in a deceptive quiet. Inside Sophie's apartment, the spiral symbols were fresh and meticulously drawn, painted in deep red across walls, furniture, and even the floorboards. Nathan whispered, "He's taunting us now, sending a message." June nodded. "And he knows we're watching." Tracing Vale's early experiments. Nathan turned his focus to Vale's early career. By reviewing old case files, university records, and archived journals, he began to piece together the trajectory that had transformed Vale from a respected psychologist to a methodical predator. 1980 to 1985, Vale conducted resilience experiments on college students. Subjects were isolated for days, observed through hidden cameras, and subjected to controlled fear stimuli. Missing students were dismissed as runaways, leaving no trace for authorities. 1986 to 1995, Vale expanded his influence, recruiting members of CLOSE to oversee experiments in Hollow Creek. Disappearances became more frequent, and spiral symbols appeared near each abduction site. 1996 to 2005, Vale refined the underground network, designing hidden facilities with cells, cameras, and surveillance equipment. Victims were recorded, their psychological responses logged, and data compiled for further study. Nathan realized the chilling truth. Vale had spent decades perfecting a system of terror. Hollow Creek was only one hub. Similar networks likely existed elsewhere, operating under the radar. The underground facility. Determined to gather more evidence, Nathan returned to the abandoned hospital and warehouse districts. This time, he wasn't just searching, he was tracking. Spiral symbols guided him through the maze-like corridors, each marking a path deeper into the predator's operations. He discovered a central control room, a darkened chamber filled with monitors displaying dozens of live feeds from other facilities in Hollow Creek. Each screen showed a victim, restrained and monitored, their every movement recorded. Vale's network was a machine, and the victims were components. Each spiral symbol was a node in the system, a point of control connecting the underground labyrinth to the surface world. Nathan knew he had to move quickly. The longer Vale operated, the more victims would be trapped, conditioned, and broken. Vale's challenge. As Nathan documented the facility, a monitor flickered to life. Vale's masked face appeared, and his voice, calm and deliberate, echoed through hidden speakers. "Detective Reyes, you're learning the pattern. But knowledge is not safety. Every action you take has been anticipated. Every move calculated. Cedar Lane was merely the beginning. You are inside the web now." Nathan's blood ran cold. Vale knew he was being observed. Every step Nathan took, every investigation, every breakthrough, it was being recorded, analyzed, and countered. Vale was not just a predator, he was a strategist, a master manipulator operating decades ahead. A desperate plan. Nathan returned to the precinct and gathered his team. Vale isn't working alone, he said firmly. CLOSE has been operating in Hollow Creek for decades. The spiral network isn't random, it's a map of his operations. We need to identify all nodes, locate victims, and dismantle the network from the center out. June and the task force nodded, understanding the magnitude of the operation. This was no longer a local investigation. It was a war against a system designed to anticipate, control, and dominate. Nathan pulled up the digital map of all known spiral symbols and disappearances. "We follow the spirals," he said. "Every symbol, every location, every victim leads us to Vale. We strike strategically, and we strike decisively." The first strike. Night fell over Hollow Creek as Nathan led a small, specialized team to one of Vale's peripheral facilities, guided by spiral markings and historical data. Snow muffled their approach, creating an eerie silence. Inside the facility, Nathan found victims restrained in cells, monitors tracking their every reaction. Spiral symbols covered walls and floors. The air was heavy, antiseptic, and metallic, and the faint cries of victims echoed through the corridors. The team moved carefully, freeing the victims one by one. Each face told a story of fear, trauma, and resilience. Nathan felt a surge of determination. Vale's network could be dismantled, but only if they moved methodically. A terrifying realization. As they secured the last room, Nathan noticed the surveillance monitor flicker to life. Vale's face appeared again, and his voice cut through the room. "You think you've won? This is only the beginning. The spiral is eternal. Every step you take, every action you make, has already been anticipated. Hollow Creek is just the start, and soon, the network will expand again." Nathan clenched his fists, his mind racing. Vale wasn't just a criminal. He was a teacher, a manipulator, a strategist with a global plan. And Hollow Creek was only the first chapter in a much larger story. He looked at the freed victims, their eyes wide with gratitude and fear. Vale's reach was vast, but Nathan knew one truth. The spiral network could be dismantled, one node at a time. And he would stop Vale, no matter the cost. The wind howled across Hollow Creek as Detective Nathan Reyes drove through the snow-covered streets, his mind racing. Marcus Vale had escalated, and Nathan knew it. Every victim freed, every spiral deciphered, only seemed to provoke the predator further. Vale was no longer content to operate from the shadows. He was taking the fight to Nathan personally. The warning came in an anonymous note left on the precinct door. "Step into the spiral, Detective Reyes. Your choices are no longer your own." Nathan felt a chill. Vale's signature was unmistakable. The precise script, the spiral symbol etched faintly in crimson at the bottom. The spiral wasn't just a mark, it was a threat, a promise, and an invitation to a game Nathan didn't yet fully understand. An unexpected lead. June Patel had spent the last 24 hours cross-referencing the locations of spiral symbols and recent disappearances. She found a pattern. After each facility Nathan had investigated, Vale had targeted a location outside Hollow Creek, a neighboring town with similar geographic features, forests, abandoned buildings, and isolated streets. "It's a network," June said, pointing at the digital map. "Hollow Creek is just the hub. The spirals are nodes. Each disappearance leads to another facility, and Vale is expanding outward. He's teaching others to replicate his methods." Nathan's jaw clenched. "So he's building successors, training them in his system, and I'm running out of time." June's expression was grim. "And the longer we wait, the more nodes he creates. Every victim is a blueprint for the next. Vale isn't just a predator, he's a strategist. And he's targeting you now." The first attack. Late that night, Nathan returned home to find his apartment ransacked. Files were shredded, computers missing, and spiral symbols painted on the walls in blood-red ink. His carefully mapped spiral network was partially destroyed. A recording device lay on the table. Pressing play, Nathan heard Vale's calm, clinical voice. "Detective Reyes, you've been following the spirals too closely. Now it's time you learned what it feels like to be a subject. Every step, every decision, every fear, you will face them firsthand." Vale's laughter echoed, faintly distorted, as a spiral symbol appeared on the screen, spinning slowly. Nathan felt a surge of adrenaline. Vale had crossed the line. He wasn't just terrorizing victims anymore. He was turning Nathan into prey. Following the trail, Nathan knew he couldn't wait for Vale to make the next move. He had to track the predator, follow the spirals, and anticipate the next strike. June worked tirelessly alongside him, analyzing old records and the recent pattern of disappearances. "They're all connected," she said, pointing at the map. "Each spiral marks a location, a facility, a victim. And every facility feeds data back to Vale. He's learning from every step we take." Nathan stared at the map, spirals connecting towns like a network of veins. Hollow Creek was the hub, but the network reached far beyond. Neighboring towns, abandoned hospitals, factories, and warehouses. Each symbol represented control, observation, and a carefully orchestrated experiment in terror. The warehouse chase. Nathan's instincts led him to an abandoned warehouse in a neighboring town. Snow fell thickly, muffling his approach. Spiral symbols painted in crimson guided him through the dark corridors. Every step he took was anticipated, every movement monitored. Inside, he found victims restrained in cells, monitors displaying live feeds of other facilities. Spiral symbols covered every wall, floor, and ceiling. Vale's operatives were everywhere, tall, masked, and silent, trained in the predator's methods. Nathan moved carefully, freeing one victim after another, heart pounding with adrenaline. But then he heard it, the soft, deliberate footsteps of Vale approaching. "Detective Reyes," Vale's voice echoed, distorted through the speakers. "You think you can disrupt the network? You are merely part of the spiral now." Nathan's pulse quickened. He realized with horror that Vale had anticipated his every move. The network wasn't just a collection of facilities. It was a trap designed to manipulate, control, and ensnare anyone who dared intervene. Psychological warfare. Vale began communicating directly with Nathan through hidden speakers and monitors. Each message was tailored to unnerve, confuse, and manipulate. "Do you know the pattern, detective? Every node you discover, every victim you save, it strengthens the network. You are playing by my rules. The spirals are not just symbols, they are a language. Each line, each curve, each loop tells a story of fear, obedience, and survival. And you are part of the story now. Do you feel it? The weight of observation? Every movement recorded, every breath anticipated. You are no longer the hunter. You are the hunted." Nathan felt a cold dread settle over him. Vale wasn't just orchestrating the abductions. He was manipulating him, turning fear into a weapon. A race against time. Nathan knew he had to act quickly. Each node in the spiral network represented a victim waiting to be broken, a facility designed to trap and condition. Vale's expansion was relentless, and the clock was ticking. He coordinated with June to track the nodes in real time, using surveillance data, historical records, and recent disappearances. Each spiral symbol was analyzed, every location mapped, and patterns predicted. The network was vast, but Nathan was determined to dismantle it piece by piece. "This is bigger than Hollow Creek," Nathan said. "Vale isn't just a predator. He's creating successors, training operatives, and expanding the network. If we don't act now, it won't just be Cedar Lane. It'll be everywhere." June nodded. "And he's watching. Every move we make, he's learning from us. We have to anticipate him, predict his next step, and strike before he does." Vale's ultimate plan. Through intercepted communications and careful observation, Nathan began to understand Vale's ultimate goal. The spiral network was not just about terror or experimentation. It was about creating a system of control, a psychological infrastructure that could manipulate, dominate, and condition human behavior on a large scale. Vale was teaching others to replicate his methods, creating a global network of trained operatives. Hollow Creek was the prototype, Cedar Lane the central hub. Each disappearance, each spiral, each victim was a node in the system. And now, Vale had turned his attention to Nathan, integrating the detective into his experiment. "The spiral is endless," Nathan muttered. "It's not just a pattern, it's a system. And I'm inside it." The first confrontation. Late that night, Nathan tracked Vale to a facility deep in the neighboring town. Snowfall had reduced visibility to near zero, but the spiral symbols painted on walls and trees guided him. Inside, Monitors displayed live feeds from other facilities, showing victims restrained, observed, and conditioned. Vale appeared, tall and masked, his presence dominating the room. "Detective Reyes," he said, voice calm, measured. "Welcome to the inner sanctum. You've learned the pattern, but knowledge is not safety. Every step you take is anticipated. Every move, every decision is part of the spiral now." Nathan raised his pistol. "It ends tonight, Vale. I'm shutting this down, starting with you." Vale tilted his head. "You think you can dismantle the network? You're merely a subject, detective. And your fear, your anticipation, it's part of my design. You are inside the spiral now, and there is no escape. The chase." Vale disappeared down a corridor, moving with speed and precision. Nathan followed, heart pounding, adrenaline surging. The facility twisted like a labyrinth, spirals painted on every wall and floor, guiding him deeper into the predator's territory. Victims called out softly, some awake, some unconscious, their eyes reflecting fear and hope. Nathan freed them quickly, but each rescue brought him closer to Vale's trap. Suddenly, a door slammed behind him, cutting off the path back. Vale's voice echoed through the facility. "You cannot escape what has been designed to endure, detective." Every turn, every spiral, every choice, it was predicted. Nathan's pulse raced. The hunter had become the hunted. A moment of clarity. Trapped in the labyrinth, Nathan realized the key to defeating Vale wasn't brute force. It was understanding the spiral. Each symbol, each line, each loop represented a choice, a reaction, a pattern. Vale had designed the network not just to trap victims, but to anticipate his enemies. Nathan studied the spirals, memorized the patterns, and planned his next move. The network was vast, but it was not infinite. Each node was connected, each victim a point of leverage, and each spiral a clue to the predator's mind. "I'm not a subject," Nathan muttered. "I'm the one who understands the system. And now, I control the spiral." The stakes. Nathan knew the next confrontation would be decisive. Vale had turned Cedar Lane, Hollow Creek, and now neighboring towns into a sprawling labyrinth of terror. Each facility, each spiral, each victim was part of a larger system. If he failed, Vale's network would continue to grow, recruiting operatives, creating successors, and spreading the spiral pattern to new locations. But if Nathan succeeded, he could dismantle the system from the inside, one node at a time. He looked at the snow-covered streets outside, Hollow Creek quiet beneath the winter sky. The predators were still out there, but now he had a plan. The spiral network was vulnerable, but only if he acted with precision, courage, and intelligence. Nathan clenched his fists, determination burning in his chest. The hunter had become the hunted, but he was ready. The next move would decide the future of Hollow Creek, and everyone trapped in Vale's spiral. Detective Nathan Reyes had never felt more hunted in his life. Every street, every building, every shadow in Hollow Creek and neighboring towns seemed alive with the presence of Marcus Vale. The predator's spiral network was no longer confined to Hollow Creek. It had spread like a contagion, reaching towns Nathan had never suspected. Spiral symbols marked abandoned warehouses, industrial complexes, even private homes, each node a trap, a laboratory, and a control point. Nathan and June Patel spent the morning analyzing the latest disappearances. Names, dates, locations, they formed a terrifying map of Vale's reach. "We're seeing simultaneous activity in 3 towns now," June said grimly. "Cedar Lane, Hollow Creek, and Edgewater. He's coordinating them like a web, each victim feeding data back into the system." Nathan's fists clenched. "So the network isn't just expanding, it's evolving. And every time we intervene, he adapts." June looked at him with concern. "And now he's targeting you directly. The note, the attacks, the traps, he's watching your every move." Nathan swallowed. Vale's psychological games had escalated. No longer content with abducting victims, Vale was challenging Nathan personally, testing his instincts, his courage, and his endurance. The first trap. The call came from a resident in Edgewater, reporting strange symbols etched onto the streets near an abandoned hospital. Spiral symbols, identical to Vale's signature, glowed faintly in the early morning fog. Nathan felt a chill. He knew this was no coincidence. Arriving at the hospital, Nathan saw the symbols more clearly. They weren't just painted. They were carved into the concrete, meticulously, like a map guiding him toward something. The symbols led him into the basement, a a long-forgotten service corridor with heavy metal doors. Inside, the air was damp and metallic. Muffled voices echoed through the corridors, each sound precise, deliberate. Nathan raised his pistol, careful with every step. Spiral symbols guided him deeper, looping around doors and walls, forming a complex pattern that seemed to pulse with menace. Then a faint scream. Nathan bolted forward, finding a small holding cell. 2 victims huddled inside, restrained and terrified. One, a teenage boy, whispered, "They're watching us, everything we do they know." Nathan's stomach twisted. Vale's network wasn't just about capturing victims. It was about observing, recording, and learning from them. Every reaction, every fear, every movement fed the Predator's data-driven system of control. The spiral network expands. Using surveillance feeds, interviews with freed victims, and historical records, Nathan traced the spiral network across multiple towns. The scale was horrifying. Abandoned factories housed cells and surveillance rooms. Warehouses contained restraint systems and psychological conditioning tools. Private homes had been adapted into observation posts, with cameras hidden in mirrors, smoke detectors, and vents. Transportation hubs were nodes for moving victims silently between locations, keeping the network fluid and untraceable. Each spiral symbol represented a node in the network, a point of control, a nexus of power over the victims' minds. Vale's operation was no longer a local threat. It was a fully developed system, a global prototype for psychological domination. Nathan's heart raced. Hollow Creek had been only the beginning, and the Predator's reach extended far beyond anything he could have imagined. Psychological warfare intensifies. Vale's messages grew more personal, more manipulative. Hidden speakers, monitors, and even intercepted communications were filled with taunts. "Detective Reyes, every move you make strengthens the network. Do you feel it? The web closing in? Every victim you save teaches me how to anticipate your actions. You are not hunting me. You are contributing to the spiral. Fear is not a reaction. It is a lesson, and you are a student." Nathan felt the weight of Vale's psychological control. The Predator wasn't just manipulating victims. He was manipulating the detective himself, using fear, anticipation, and constant surveillance to break him down, to make him doubt every decision. He realized that defeating Vale required more than courage. It required understanding the Predator's mind, predicting his moves, and dismantling the spiral network node by node. The Edgewater facility. Nathan's investigation led him to the largest facility yet, deep in Edgewater. Snow covered the approach, muffling sound and masking his presence. Spiral symbols led through the gates, across the yard, and into a massive industrial building. Inside, the facility was a labyrinth. Monitors lined the walls, showing dozens of victims in real time. Spiral symbols were everywhere, painted on walls, floors, doors, and ceilings. The air smelled of antiseptic, rust, and fear. Vale's operatives moved silently, trained in his methods, executing tasks with precision and obedience. Nathan's team moved carefully, freeing victims, documenting everything, and avoiding detection. But the deeper they went, the more traps appeared. Floorboards were rigged to trigger alarms, doors locked automatically, cameras hidden in every corner. Vale had anticipated their moves, designing the facility as both a prison and a test for anyone who dared intervene. A direct confrontation. In the facility's central chamber, Vale appeared, tall and imposing, mask and gloves on. Spiral symbols adorned the walls behind him, painted in dark crimson. "Detective Reyes," Vale said, calm and measured, "you've come far. But every step you've taken has been anticipated. Every action, every choice part of my design." Nathan raised his pistol. "Vale, it ends here. I'm shutting down this network, starting with you." Vale tilted his head. "You think you can dismantle the system? You're inside the spiral now. Every decision you make has been predicted. Every reaction analyzed. The spiral isn't just a pattern, it is a machine. And you are a component." Nathan's pulse raced. Vale wasn't just threatening him. He was demonstrating his control, showing how the spiral network manipulated even the hunter. A deadly maze. Vale vanished down a corridor, leading Nathan into a labyrinth of traps, spiral symbols, and hidden observation points. The walls seemed to pulse, the symbols forming a hypnotic pattern that disoriented him. Every room contained victims, restrained and terrified, some conscious, some unconscious. Spiral symbols were etched into every surface, marking nodes, control points, and data collection points. Nathan realized that the entire facility was designed as a massive experiment in psychological control, with him as both participant and intruder. He freed victims cautiously, noting the network's design, the flow of movement, and the way each node connected to others. Vale's system was vast, intricate, and terrifyingly precise. The breaking point. Hours into the operation, Nathan reached the inner sanctum, a room filled with monitors, computers, and detailed records of every victim, every facility, and every spiral symbol. Vale's network was now fully visible. The scale was staggering. Over 50 active nodes, dozens of victims under surveillance, and operatives trained to anticipate every intervention. Vale had designed a system of control that could operate independently, continuously refining itself through the reactions of victims and intruders alike. Nathan felt the weight of the Predator's brilliance and cruelty. Hollow Creek had been only the beginning. The spiral network extended far beyond, a sprawling system of terror, observation, and psychological domination. A dire realization. As Nathan studied the monitors, he noticed something even more chilling. One screen showed spiral symbols being painted in a town he hadn't yet investigated. Vale's expansion was ongoing. New victims were already being selected, already trapped in the spiral network. Nathan realized that time was running out. Every delay, every misstep strengthened the network. Vale's ultimate plan was clear. A global system of control, using psychological terror, manipulation, and observation to dominate anyone caught within it. He clenched his fists. Hollow Creek and Cedar Lane were only the first chapters. Vale's network was alive, expanding, and adapting. And the detective knew one truth. To stop the Predator, he had to strike decisively, dismantle the spiral network node by node, and confront the mastermind himself. Preparing for the final confrontation. Back at the precinct, Nathan and June devised a strategy. Using the network's records, historical data, and spiral patterns, they began planning coordinated raids on multiple facilities. Every node would be dismantled, every victim freed, and every operative captured. "This is it," Nathan said, voice tight. "Vale's network is vulnerable, but only if we act quickly, precisely, and strategically. One wrong move, and the spiral spreads further." June nodded. "We know where the nodes are, the patterns he uses, and his psychological tactics. We can outthink him if we act together." Nathan stared out the snow-covered streets of Hollow Creek, knowing the Predator was out there, planning, observing, and adapting. The spiral network was vast, terrifying, and relentless, but he was ready. The next confrontation would be decisive. Vale had escalated. Nathan was prepared. The spiral network had reached its most extensive and dangerous stage yet, and the final battle was looming. Detective Nathan Reyes stood at the edge of Hollow Creek, snow drifting across the deserted streets, the cold wind biting through his coat. After months of investigation, countless nights chasing shadows, and hours spent piecing together Marcus Vale's horrific spiral network, the final confrontation had come. Every victim freed, every facility documented, every spiral symbol mapped, everything led to this moment. Vale's network had grown like a dark, spreading virus. Cedar Lane, Hollow Creek, Edgewater, and other towns had been infiltrated by his system of psychological terror and surveillance. Each node, warehouses, abandoned hospitals, private homes, had been designed to manipulate and observe. Now, after weeks of careful coordination with the task force and June Patel, Nathan was preparing to dismantle the remaining nodes and finally confront the man who had terrorized so many lives. Coordinated strikes. The task force split into teams, each assigned to strike a specific node of the spiral network. Communications were encrypted, routes carefully planned, and contingencies rehearsed. Nathan led the strike on Vale's central facility, the largest node, the heart of the network. "This is it," he said to June, who stood beside him reviewing maps. "We know where he is, and we know how he operates. Every trap, every symbol, every tactic, he's been doing this for decades. But tonight it ends." June nodded, eyes steely. "We've freed over 60 victims so far. Every node we hit weakens the network. Vale's reach is vast, but he's counting on fear and precision. We'll outthink him this time. Nathan glanced at the snow-covered streets, empty and silent. Vale had been patient, calculating, and meticulous. But patience could only last so long. Entering the heart, the central facility loomed ahead, an abandoned industrial complex on the outskirts of Hollow Creek, snow drifting across the roof and windows. Spiral symbols were etched into every visible surface, the signature of Vale's obsession with control and observation. Nathan's heart pounded as he led his team inside. Cameras blinked, hidden microphones tracked their movements, and the air smelled of rust and antiseptic. Spiral symbols guided them through corridors, but Nathan moved with precision, memorizing every turn and anticipating every trap. Inside, victims were restrained in cells, some conscious, some unconscious, their eyes wide with fear. Spiral symbols were painted on the floors, walls, and ceilings, a language of terror designed to manipulate the mind. Nathan quickly coordinated the team, unlocking cells, freeing victims, and securing the perimeter. Vale revealed. From the shadows, a voice echoed. "Detective Reyes, you've come far, but the spiral is eternal. You cannot destroy it." Nathan spun, pistol drawn, as Marcus Vale emerged, tall, masked, and methodical. Behind him, spiral symbols lined the walls, painted in deep crimson. "Vale!" Nathan shouted. "It ends tonight. Every node dismantled, every victim freed. Your network is finished." Vale tilted his head, calm and deliberate. "You misunderstand, Detective. The spiral is not mine to control alone. It is a system, a machine, a pattern. And I am merely the teacher. You are inside the web now. Every move you make, every decision, every fear, it all serves the spiral." Nathan's pulse surged. Vale wasn't just threatening him. He was demonstrating the reach and intelligence of his network, the culmination of decades of manipulation. A calculated battle. Nathan advanced, carefully. Vale had prepared for confrontation, every corridor a potential trap. Hidden cameras monitored their movements, and operatives trained in Vale's methods moved silently through the facility, ready to strike. The first clash was sudden. Vale's operatives ambushed a secondary corridor, but the task force was ready. Using the spirals as a map, Nathan coordinated the team, neutralizing threats and freeing victims simultaneously. Vale watched, calm and composed, observing reactions, analyzing patterns. Nathan realized the terrifying truth. Vale's network was not just about capturing and controlling victims. It was about perfecting observation, learning from every interaction, refining tactics, and teaching his successors. Breaking the spiral, Nathan moved to the inner sanctum, where the facility's monitors displayed live feeds from other nodes. Each feed showed a victim restrained, observed, and controlled. Spiral symbols connected facilities like veins, forming a web of influence and terror. "This is it," Nathan muttered. "The heart of the network." He coordinated the shutdown. Monitors were disabled, cameras destroyed, restraints removed, and operatives captured. One by one, the nodes fell silent, and the victims were freed. The spiral network was unraveling, its intricate system of control collapsing under Nathan's strategic strikes. Vale, however, remained calm. "Do you think this ends with me?" he asked, voice echoing. "The spiral is larger than any one person. And even now, others are being trained, others are observing. You may stop me, but the system persists." Nathan realized Vale's final play. Even in defeat, the Predator had seeded successors, operatives trained to continue the network elsewhere. The spiral wasn't entirely his. It was a method, a legacy, a system designed to endure. Survivors speak. As the facility was secured, survivors began revealing long-buried secrets. They spoke of other facilities, other operatives, and horrifying experiences that had remained hidden. Lila Hammond, freed months earlier, revealed the names of operatives she had memorized, locations of secret caches, and hidden escape routes. Marcy Linton disclosed psychological experiments that forced victims to betray one another, creating divisions that strengthened Vale's control. Other survivors named towns where they had been transported, showing Nathan that the network spanned far beyond Hollow Creek. Each revelation provided new intelligence, but also a sobering truth. Vale's network was vast, methodical, and deeply entrenched. The spiral network might be broken tonight, but its seeds had already spread. The final confrontation. Nathan cornered Vale in the central chamber, the spiral symbol dominating the wall behind him. "It's over, Vale," Nathan said, voice firm. "Your network ends here." Vale's mask concealed his expression, but his eyes gleamed with calculated intelligence. "It ends only if you can control the pattern. The spiral is eternal. You may free the victims, dismantle the nodes, but the design, the method, lives on. And soon, others will take my place." Nathan stepped forward. "I don't care who takes your place. I'll dismantle every node, track every operative, and ensure that Hollow Creek, and every town you touch, is safe." Vale tilted his head. "Do you understand, detective? The network is not just physical. It exists in minds, in patterns, in reactions. And you are now part of it." Nathan clenched his fists, drawing on every ounce of training, experience, and determination. "Then I'll make sure the spiral collapses, starting tonight." The capture. Vale attempted to flee through a hidden passage, but Nathan anticipated the move. Using knowledge from freed survivors and careful observation of the spiral network, Nathan blocked the route, cornering Vale. "You're done," Nathan said. "There's nowhere left to hide." Vale paused, then slowly raised his hands. "You may stop me, but remember, the spiral doesn't die. It adapts. It survives. And even now, others will continue the work." Nathan signaled the task force. Vale was restrained, his network dismantled, and the central facility secured. For the first time in months, Nathan allowed himself a deep breath. Hollow Creek was quiet, the spiral network broken, or so it seemed. A chilling discovery. As Nathan and the team reviewed the captured files, monitors, and spiral mappings, June uncovered something that made their stomachs turn. A list of names, dates, and locations extending far beyond Vale's known operations. "This isn't just Hollow Creek," June whispered. "Vale's network has affiliates, other operatives trained in his methods. Some of them may never have reported directly to him. He didn't work alone." Nathan stared at the list. Each entry suggested another network node, potentially active, potentially targeting new victims. Vale had created a legacy, a method designed to persist even without him. "The spiral isn't over," Nathan said quietly. "We've stopped Vale, but the system lives. And we have to be ready for what comes next." Emotional aftermath. Victims began processing their trauma, some reconnecting with families for the first time in years. Nathan visited those who had been freed, witnessing the fragile but remarkable resilience of survivors. Lila Hammond returned to her parents, tears streaming as she embraced them. Marcy Linton found solace in documenting her experiences, helping law enforcement refine methods to identify other network nodes. Other survivors, once broken, began reclaiming autonomy and courage, determined not to let Vale's control define them. Nathan himself felt a complex mix of relief, exhaustion, and grief. The battle was won, but the psychological scars on victims, the town, and even himself would linger. The spiral continues. As Nathan drove through the snow-covered streets of Hollow Creek that night, he couldn't shake the feeling that Vale's shadow still lingered. Spiral symbols had been erased, facilities dismantled, but the predator's method persisted. Every node dismantled, every victim freed, was a victory, but the possibility of new networks, new operatives, and new victims remained. Nathan knew the fight was far from over. Vale's capture was a milestone, but the spiral network had planted seeds, trained successors, and left behind a blueprint for terror. And somewhere, in another town, the spirals were already being drawn again. Nathan gripped the steering wheel tightly. The predator had been stopped. The network had been dismantled. Hollow Creek was safe for now, but the spiral would never truly end. Marcus Vale was incarcerated, his operations disrupted, and the spiral network dismantled in Hollow Creek. Survivors began rebuilding their lives, sharing their stories, and exposing long-hidden truths. Yet the final chilling discovery, the list of potential affiliates and unaccounted-for nodes, left Nathan and the task force with a sobering realization. Vale's system may have been broken, but the spiral method, the pattern of control, had the power to survive. The fight against human predation, manipulation, and terror was far from over.